Hello, everybody. Um, yeah, how you guys doing? Let's see. First of all, a couple of announcements before we get to tonight's topic. If you now, unless could be that there's something. Now I know why this is. I should have a cover. Yeah, usually I don't need to cover my lamp. The lighting's awful. It always is on Zoom. At least every Zoom session I've either hosted or been on. So I guess I'll just assume you guys can live with that if it's not too distracting. For some reason, though, the light is much brighter tonight than it usually is in my room. Um, Here's the thing: we have, as you can see, in the next 2 weeks to cover all of Etruscan and Roman art. So we'll do most of them tonight, and then next week finishing Roman art and reviewing for the midterm. And of course, because of spring break, you guys get an extra week to study if you plan to study during spring break. And then the test itself will be March 28th. So we've got 3 weeks before the midterm. But we have a lot to cover. However, tonight is the first assignment due date, as you should know. I sent everybody a reminder, and that's your first short papers. So I printed this up. I did this a couple semesters ago because I teach, different classes, a combination of different classes each semester. So obviously I crossed out where it said 1.2. That's my class I was teaching online last semester at the same time. And you guys are 1.1, so you can adjust this accordingly. So the way to label your papers, they're due by midnight tonight. So don't wait till like 11:59, right? And that would be art 1.1, and no spaces, then short paper, just like that, the way, capital S, capital P. So at a glance, I can log them in correctly for each class and then forward the ones I give my readers to grade and log in and start grading the ones that I'm going to grade. So art 1.1, short paper, number 1, of course, obviously it's not your second paper, underline, and then last name. Of course, that would all just be last name, comma, first name. And that way I can really go key in as to where those files belong. And the essay definitely need to be in a PDF format or I won't be able to open them. And that's a requirement the whole college has anyway for all student submissions and teachers handouts to be sent, back and forth between any students and faculty and administrators as a PDF to markw@aol.com. Okay, I think I've already, I did. I said all of that in an email that I sent last night, early enough that you have well over 24 hours notice in case somehow I know a couple people couldn't attend the last lecture and sent me emails asking what the upcoming deadlines are. Well, that's it. That's the first one this semester. And then 3 weeks into tonight will be the midterm, which we will review for next week. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the procedure? What I just showed you on? It was pretty straightforward, right? The point is if you send it, well, first of all, if you send it in other than PDF, it's just not going to get logged in correctly because, well, I might be able to open it, but then I have to forward many of my papers to readers. Some of them can't open it. It just causes complications. And the second thing is if you don't label it the way I just showed everyone, it could, not necessarily, but it could easily be mislaid because, then I won't be sure which class or which, your full name, right? Last name and first. The way, this is important detail, the way you enrolled, because I know these days so many people have different names on their email handle or that they like using than that their legal name was, which I don't know. I've never worked at the Office of Records and Admissions at any JC, but I assume they ask for your legal name and some kind of document to verify. So in other words, whatever name you enrolled under, first and last, exactly as it was spelled that in that process is how you should label your PDFs, all your assignments, including extra credit. Speaking of extra credit, I haven't gotten too many people submitting extra credit. I know it's early. You haven't even gotten your first grades yet. I've gotten a couple of people sending things in, but no one's gotten more than 10 points, and only 3 or 4 people have gotten 5 or 10 points. So you guys still have plenty of opportunities for extra credit. But of course, because of the way this class was structured and the starting date later than the others, with spring break coming up, etc., your opportunities will be down to what, 7 weeks after the midterm. But you can submit extra credit at any time up until and through the end of final exams week. No late papers that week, right? But that's getting ahead of ourselves. I'll remind everyone of this. I'll send emails, I always do, before each of the deadlines. But extra credit, you do have the option of adding in case you think you didn't do well on the final, for example, or you need more points than you might be able to get on the final. You have that option of sending in extra credit even up till the last day of final exams, which I believe is the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. That gives us a week to process all the grades, us teachers. That's why it can't be after Memorial Day weekend. Okay, any questions? Sorry, there's something on my.
I have a question.
Yes.
For the paper. Hi. So I just want to ask, I read in the notes that you said that you're okay if we use footnotes, or we just
regular footnotes is good, actually. That's
okay,
what it should require, but we figure in this college, at least everyone I've talked to, other teachers, most, not all, but most of them say, well, it's okay to do in-text citations the way I showed you guys when we talked about the 5 requirements for your paper, and there was a sample of a paper I forwarded to everybody of a completed paper. So regular traditional footnotes is fine. It's excellent.
Okay, great. It seems easier for me, like for mine, because I don't have quotes or anything, so great.
Sure. Yeah, footnotes. Yeah, you need only, if you want full credit and, aim for a top grade, everyone does, of course, to get not just an A-, hopefully not only 90, but 100 points. Then what you'll need to do is have at least 2 different sources cited. And if it's a website, you should include the URL in your footnote, so I can go back and look at how it ties in with the bibliography, right? I hope that's clear. I mean, I want to make sure, because some people, I don't know why, but it's still unclear that footnotes or endnotes, right, in-text citations, in other words, of any kind, whether they're in the text or at the bottom of the page, like a footnote, is not the same thing as a bibliography. So people that turn in papers without citing any of their sources within the body of their paper, whether it's in a footnote or an in-text citation, right off the bat, they've lost a grade, because that's a pretty reasonable requirement. Obviously, it should be something everyone's been doing since my daughter started doing it in middle school. That's what they required in her school district. I assume it's true for most California public school districts and private ones. She went to Catholic school for the first 3 years and then public school. And they were doing footnotes already by 6th grade, as I recall it. And so traditional footnotes is fine, as long as you tie them in with what that source was as it's listed more thoroughly in your bibliography at the end. Right, because that's a separate list of all the sources. You don't have to cite all of them. If you want full points, you've got to cite at least 2 different sources within the body of your paper, whichever way, by footnote or in text. Okay, is that clear? That's what we're here for. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Sure, of course. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, tonight's topic is one of, I think, the more colorful, we'll say it that way. Well, the Roman Empire was, of course, one of the most influential of all the ancient cultures, because we still have things with us today. That's why I made that list up, and I'll go ahead and hold it up, because these aren't all separate definitions. There are 2 definitions, and we'll probably get to, well, one of them, maybe both of them tonight for this topic. But this list of things invented by ancient Romans, some people know maybe part of this list, but rarely have I had anybody tell me, well, I knew all those things already, unless you had a teacher who was really knowledgeable about Roman history. I was, because I've been to Rome 4 times, and every time I go, I stay with people in Rome who are historians themselves. And I learned quite a bit from them, of course, about the history of their ancient ancestors. Concrete didn't exist before the Romans invented it. We still use it today for all kinds of construction, of course, sites and projects. Domes, again, didn't exist before the Romans invented them, and now you see them on buildings all around the world. Aqueducts, again, the idea that will be a definition. You see it right there below the list. We will get that far tonight, what those are, but some of you already know. We have one called the California Aqueduct. It's huge. I think it's the biggest in the world, or at least in the US. And if we didn't have that, we couldn't get water distributed to our poor Southern California neighbors who don't have large rivers. Anyone ever seen the LA River? To do an aqueduct from there to downtown LA would be a joke. It would have no water in it. So we'll talk about what those are, and one of the slides is an aqueduct, a world famous Roman aqueduct. And then Coliseums, again, didn't exist before the Romans invented them, and we'll talk about how they were used and some unique things about them. And triumphal arches, we probably won't get that far tonight. And the one that most people get more surprised by, unless you study Roman history, is the sixth item, interstate road system. Yeah, we had it in this country. It started in, well, there was some work under Roosevelt's, WPA. So you know what that was during the New Deal that, he did during the Depression. That's in the 30s, but it wasn't connecting every state or coast to coast. So that was in the 50s under Eisenhower. It was a good project that he promoted because he saw the value of the European road systems. Well, before either 20th century European road systems like the German Autobahn, so it's a major road system that actually Hitler started doing, but now it's totally new and different than it was then, connecting all parts not only of Germany, but Germany to every other neighboring country. I think Eisenhower, when he was commanding our forces that defeated the Nazis in Western Europe, he saw the advantage of that, and for civilian use, of course. So interstate road systems in this country really were established only in the 1950s, that late. And of course, they're indispensable to a modern country of any kind. The Romans were the first culture to do that. Okay, so let's get started with our first must-know slide. But we're starting with the Etruscans, and we'll say, who were they? Some of you probably have heard of them, but not everybody has. So let's now see. Now everybody can see this slide? Yes?
Yes.
Right. Okay, this is, the first slide is a single word. The title is Sarcophagus, Sarcophagus. Again, you guys have your syllabi in front of your syllabus, so you should have that spelling in front of you. So I just spell these words once. The location is, it's a town in Italy. Cerveteri, Cerveteri, 520 BC, or BCE if you prefer, 520 BC. So let's start with who the Etruscans were. This is part of the meaning of all the three slides. We have 3 slides of Etruscan art before we get to the Romans. The Etruscans were the culture that ruled all of Italy before the Romans did. They're not, we think, even genetically directly related. You have to write this part. They're definitely not linguistically or religiously similar. The Romans had their own religions, where they basically copied the Greeks, and they had their own language, Latin. These people, we don't know what language they spoke. It's a mystery of history. Literally no researcher, no historian has been able to crack the mystery of what the Etruscan language was, what alphabet they use and what, like, we know they had written language because there's little segments of pieces of their artifacts that have some writing on them, but not enough for us to understand them. So all we can say is they had their own language. Now you should be writing this. They had their own language and their own religion, and they dominated the Etruscans. That's Etruscans with a capital E, of course. Etruscans were the culture that dominated all of Italy before the Romans. In fact, they ruled Rome. They ruled Rome. Later on, Rome rebelled against them, got free of their dominance, and then began growing the Romans in power, and they eventually wiped out the Etruscans, quite literally. When they took an Etruscan city, they pretty much either sold into slavery or massacred the entire population. So they wiped out the Etruscan culture over several, but it took them centuries. The Etruscans were a very powerful culture. And so once Rome got free of Etruscan rule, the tables were turned, as the saying goes, and they began dominating first just central Italy and then all of southern Italy. And eventually they completely conquered the whole Italian peninsula. And that's the start of their famous expansion. The Roman culture, of course, became the biggest empire in the ancient world. And we'll get to them in a little bit. So the Etruscans predate them. And these two people, it might be obvious, are a couple. Where most evidence points to, and the evidence is in the actual tomb. So this is from a tomb. Now, this definition, I almost forgot. We got to do that one. It's at the top of the same page with the things invented by the Romans. What is a sarcophagus? It could come up on either this slide. By the way, this one, I almost always say this and I forgot it until just now. This slide is so important to the, understanding of the period we're covering. I'm not cutting, in other words, this slide from the study list. When we do the review next week, I'll cut about a third of all the slides, but not this one. So make sure you take extra careful notes. So what is the sarcophagus? That definition, by the way, could come up on its own, just as a definition on the midterm. I'll explain how that's going to happen when we discuss the midterm and how to study for it. Okay, so a sarcophagus is a large stone. I'll say it slowly and repeat it once. A large stone or metal box containing the remains of a deceased human being, containing the remains of a deceased human being, and often with decorations on the outside, period. Okay, I'll say it one more time. The sarcophagus is a large metal or stone box containing the remains of a deceased human being, and often with decorations along the outside. That's exactly what we're looking at. It's a stone box, a sarcophagus that had the bodies of this deceased couple inside. Now, some of you are very observant, you have to write this, but you notice the line down the middle, obviously, that was a cut made by some kind of saw, I don't know what. When the French discovered this, they were occupying Italy under Napoleon, so they stole it. There's no other word for it. They took it without asking back to Paris. So it's in display now in the Louvre. You don't have to write that as part of the meaning, but if you ever go to Paris, you can find this piece. In a whole wing of the Louvre, there's Etruscan art. It's fascinating. So if you're curious, that's how they opened it and found there was nothing left but bones, of course, of the two deceased Etruscans, a husband and wife. We have evidence to believe they were a married couple. And the evidence on the face of it, literally, as in their faces, their facial expressions, and their body language, is that they were happily married. I don't think anybody would dispute that. No historian I've read has ever said, we don't know if this couple was a happy couple. The evidence is strong that they were, but not just in the sculpture, life-size. These are life-size figures of the actual appearance of this couple, the husband and wife. But what are they doing? Well, that leads to one of the other definitions that come up with it's actually on the bottom of the previous page, the cult of the dead. They are practicing, or a part of, I should say, they are participating in, there we go, that's a better word. They're participating in the cult of the dead. So since that's a separate definition, again, it might appear as a standalone definition on the midterm. I'll give you that definition. I'll also cut the list of terms to know down by about a third too when we review. But for now, assume you might have to, define this term or recognize it on the midterm. What's the cult of the dead? Okay, it was a religious belief of the Etruscans, in which they thought their deceased ancestors would come to life every night inside their tombs, and party until dawn, period. Now, it sounds funny, but I know the word party sounds odd to connect it with an ancient culture, but we know they had parties, of course, orgies in ancient Rome. I'll say it again. It's a unique religious belief. No other culture's ever had anything quite like it. This is their version of the afterlife. Again, that term, cult of the dead, is a religious belief of the Etruscans, in which they thought their deceased ancestors would come to life every night inside their tomb and party until dawn, period. Now, you could say throughout eternity, if you want to add that, because that's what they're talking, that's their version of the afterlife. It's very different than the Egyptians, the Greeks, or the Romans, or the Babylonians. It wasn't based on gods in a good place or a bad place, or up or down, or heaven or nothing to do with that. They just believed that all Etruscans well, let me rephrase it, the Etruscans who had their own tombs. So that's mostly the middle and upper classes. So that is the limitation. Could come to life. But of course, even some of the working class could, if they pool their money, when one of the relatives died, perhaps afford a small tomb. So if that family, any Etruscan family, had a tomb where they placed the bodies of their ancestors, usually the upper classes had these kinds of sarcophagi, right? But even again, if all you had is the box with no decorations, that could be afforded by almost any family. They believe that their ancestors, their deceased ancestors, would wake up inside their tombs and party all night long until dawn throughout eternity. It's just a remarkably unique image or concept, I should say, of what the afterlife was like. So that's what they're doing. In fact, I had one student, I'll never forget, it stuck in my brain because it seems so, a humorous observation, let's put it that way, or at least an attempt at humor. One of my students, when I showed this slide, I don't know how many years ago, in person in a class at Annalee Hall, she said, "Oh, I think I know what they're talking about." He said, "What are they saying to each other?" Is, the mystery people have here. We don't know. There's no inscription here. Where's the remote? You had it last. No, you dropped it. It's behind the sofa. Who knows what they're saying, but we have an idea. And here's the actual evidence that is inside this tomb, which is that they were watching some form of live entertainment, or should we say dead entertainment, because their other families members who had passed before them, their ancestors, their predecessors, this couple's, parents, grandparents, great grandparents, would all come to life together in the same family tomb, and their servants would also do that. And here's how that might look. So let's go forward to, this is that tomb. This is the tomb in which that sarcophagi was found. It's now, of course, as I said, in Paris. There are hundreds of sarcophagi in museums in Italy, especially near Rome. One of the biggest of these cemeteries is in Rome. So what we see here are people entertaining the people that own the tomb, but they also get to have that same experience. They get to wake up, and of course they're still servants in the afterlife, but that's what they believed, right? They would keep the same role they had in their real life or their earthly life. And so some of these were dancers, some of them were musicians, like this guy here playing some kind of strange musical instrument. Looks like a small harp. And then here's a guy what looks like he's got, bird wings, almost eagle wings or something, and an outfit that he's dancing in. And then this guy's clearly doing some kind of a ritual dance. So they even sometimes had animals inside, supposedly. I don't know if they buried the animals. I'm not sure about that. But at some point, the entertainment crew would come to life along with the people of that family, the ancestors, all who had all died in the family, and they would just party. They would have food, wine, music, dancing, and yes, more intimate activities I can't describe. If you go to a museum in Italy, you have to write this to with an Etruscan exhibit, and you look at some of their vase paintings, or even some of the paintings on the walls of some of the tombs. Most of them didn't get this graphic. You'll see things that would be X-rated, definitely, in this country. And so they weren't hung up about that kind of thing. As part of the entertainment of their afterlife, they believed that you could still have sex, in other words. And in any way or form you felt like it, between consenting adults. They were very non-prudish, you could say it that way, about their sexual life on earth, or in their their regular life, and then how they thought it would be in their afterlife. Pretty unusual culture. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole. Oh, I didn't give you one more definition. Yeah, necropolis. Now that is it. You see it on the top of the second definition down at the top of the page for today's terms, above things invented by the Romans. Okay, so what's a necropolis? This is a short definition. Necropolis is a city of the dead, in which fancy tombs were arranged along a street-like pattern, period. I'll say it again. A necropolis was a city of the dead, in which fancy tombs were arranged along a street-like pattern, period. Can anybody here think of any places anywhere in the US including maybe the Greater Bay Area or any of other cities in the United States, or how about in Europe even, where there might be a necropolis or two? Anybody? If you travel to some parts of this country.
Did you say tombs?
Yes, TOMBS is how that's spelled.
Oh,
Yes.
so like
Yeah.
New Orleans?
Yes, excellent. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you've been there. Have you been there?
No, I've met some people from there, but I've never been.
Yeah, there's a bunch of movies where scenes set in New Orleans. I mean, where some scenes happen in those cemeteries, and one of them is Easy Rider, movie that came out when I was in college. That's how far back my college career went. Was that 1970 or so? Yeah, where a couple of hippies take motorcycles across the country, and I don't want to give away the ending. No spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. It's a pretty good movie. It won a bunch of Academy Awards, and one whole scene is where they take, yes, I know, psychedelics and go into one of those necropolises. Yes, there are several in New Orleans. There are a bunch of them, and there's a bunch of them back east, like New York and Boston, and outside, well, almost every big city. There is one where I live in the East Bay. It's in Oakland. I mean, nearby. It's the biggest necropolis in the Bay Area. Yeah, it's called a Mountain View Cemetery, and that could be an extra credit price. It's so beautiful that people go there just to look at the flowers. This is the time of year to go there, where the tulips are in bloom.
What do you say?
Oakland has a necropolis. It's called the Mountain View, two-word cemetery. It's in a nice area of Oakland towards the hills, where it's surrounded by all these fancier homes. But if you walk or drive through there, and you can do either, walk or drive through, you don't have to come to see somebody, and at this point, they're not restricting people. Last I heard it, yeah, because I have friends that live within a few blocks of there. I live in Berkeley, but this is just North Oakland, but near the city of Piedmont, border of Piedmont. And if you go inside there, walking or driving, you'll see some of the fanciest tombs anywhere in the United States. All kinds of famous people. Julia Morgan, the architect that designed Hearst Castle, is buried there. And so are the Crockers, and one of the Stanfords that helped found Stanford University. A whole bunch of famous people are buried there. And their tombs, they were competing, each family with the other. Kept getting a little fancier the later they were, built. And it started during the Civil War is when that cemetery opened, because of the all the bodies that came from the fighting of the Civil War. But then it turned into more like, and it was a necropolis. That's what it is. So yes, we have a bunch of them. Yeah, that is, yeah. If you know what, you probably don't have pictures of I don't know who it was that spoke up about New Orleans, but if you want to do a little kind of a quick internet search and forward an article that has some photos, of course, it's 5 points extra credit. I think they're called San Luis, as in St. Louis. I know it's another city further up the Mississippi in Missouri, but it's spelled the same way. San Luis cemeteries, and there's a bunch of them. I almost died in one. I had a .45 revolver put to my head by someone who was robbing everyone that lived in that neighborhood. I'll never forget that day. I almost ended up in one of those graves. Yeah, the local police captain told me this guy had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. They caught him eventually long after I left. Yeah, so if you're going to go to New Orleans, you want to check in locally with the people who live there as to what neighborhoods are the most reasonable. That's not the French Quarter, right where the Mardi Gras is. It's somewhere about a mile or less than a mile from there are those necropoli or necropolises, however you say that. There's several of them. And they are quite beautiful. They actually have guided tours. That'd be the way to go, with a group, a guided tour and a tour guide, because there's a lot of history there. New Orleans is 300 plus years old. Okay, so we've covered the meaning in more ways than one, but hopefully everyone has, the basic facts about it. Let's do a formal analysis. It's a warm color, of course. It's a kind of almost a liver color, isn't it? Or you could just say a shade of brown. Anyway, it's an earth tone. Obviously, nothing is cool about it except the discoloration from being out in the open air now for 200 years. So originally it was all that kind of brownish color. And then we have really good texture on the hair, the clothing, the faces of this couple, and even on their feet here. So that's all done with Carveline, of course. The modeling, there is none. This was meant to be indoors, shut up at night, where there was, supposedly partying going on, but obviously the reality is it was all pitch black, so you couldn't have seen it. So it's now the only modeling is the lighting from the museum. Okay, and then we have the rhythm of the arms and hands and heads. And look, they both have dreads. That's how they wore their hair, their feet, and the bed they're on, right? And the largest mass is pretty obvious: the bed, then the husband, then the wife. That's it. There's three masses. For space, they're life-size human figures that overlap each other. And then they both overlap the bed. So that's it. There's real space and overlapping. And that's all you need to write about space on this piece. And then we have stable almost entirely. There's really very little dynamic. The tops of their heads, even his head isn't that rounded, but hers is, she's wearing a cap. And then this here, the pillow, maybe, well, even that's fairly stable. But the end of the bed, otherwise, almost every part of this is stable. By far, the majority of this is stable. It's not balanced. It's unbalanced toward the right, of course. I would say it's balanced top to bottom, though, depending on where you draw the line, for the mass of those two bodies roughly equaling the mass of the bed, especially if you draw the line right there. It's roughly balanced, top to bottom. And let's see, I already mentioned the rhythm, the color, modeling, texture, space. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. You know, if I forget, once in a while I do one of the 9 elements on any one slide, just speak up. Okay, this is not a must know. Well, wait a minute, I better double check. Yeah, I took this off the list. I used to have it. It's the tomb of the Lionesses, and there they are helping entertain the masters that would have been, including the people in the whose bodies were in that sarcophagus, which is all the sarcophagi have been removed from this tomb. But if you go to Italy, it's fascinating because a lot of these tombs are open to the public. Now, all the sarcophagi have been put in museums, but every one of them, there's several cities in Italy, including just outside Rome. That's the one I went to, where you know, the tombs are open to the public, the most interesting ones. They're restored, and they have guidelines or guide ropes, so you can't walk up to them and touch them, of course. And there's usually somebody on duty to, you know, keep an eye out so no one tries to take a piece of the walls with them. And then right nearby, there's always a museum of Etruscan art. So it's if you get to Italy, that's a part of Italian history most Americans know nothing about. Here's an example of the inside of one of the other tombs. The sarcophagi were being put into these notches, or niches, I guess is the better word, niches here in the wall. And then look at this. These are some of the things they could use in the afterlife: wine, tools. I don't know if they were, I'm not sure how they did that. It looks like a whip. And then here's a couple of maybe strange looking pets. I mean, they don't look like house cats, but maybe they're just, you know, very feral cats. Anyway, and then here's a musical instrument, probably a drum. So these are things that they believe they could then take off the wall, I guess, and then use to entertain themselves in the afterlife after the sunset.
Is it not similar to ancient Egypt and their kind of beliefs about the afterlife and how, how is it different a little?
It's more similar to, it's a good point. They're more similar to the ancient Egyptians in that regard, but the Egyptians believe their spirit passed across a river.
Oh, yeah.
Had to be tested, and you could go to either a good or bad place, and they weren't limited to waking up inside their own tombs, meaning
right, like their spirit would go. So
that's the difference. Yeah, it's a significant difference. There is some similarity in that some of those objects on the wall might have replicated what they owned in real life, but they didn't have room for each person, and especially when the upper classes had lots of personal belongings, they couldn't have then also fit that into the same tomb with dozens of other, you know, sarcophagi. So they didn't put their personal belongings in. So there are those differences. Some similarity. Yeah. Okay, this is the next must know. This is Porta Augusta. It's the third one on your list for tonight. Porta Augusta, like Augustus Caesar without the S. Porta Augusta. Perugia, it's a city in Italy. Of course, capital Perugia, 200 BC or BCE. So what we're looking at is the last remaining section of Etruscan city walls in all of Italy. Again, well, you could just say period because they only were in Italy. So it's the last remaining section of an Etruscan city wall. It's the main gate to what was once an Etruscan city. Today, it's the city of Perugia. I have no idea what the Etruscans named it. Nobody knows their language. That name Perugia is a modern Italian word. But it's misleading for some people when they look at this, because that has nothing to do with the Etruscans. And you might be able to tell someone had glass in the windows. No, they didn't have that. Maybe they used glass for some wine, goblets or something, or even a flask or something. But no, these are Renaissance editions. So everything above where my cursor is going, right, or should I say the other way around, everything below that is the original Etruscan wall and gateway or entrance to that city. That was added during the Renaissance, 500 years ago. In Italian history, that's not that old. Well, it's not considered new, even in Italy, but nowhere near as old as the walls to which they attach that. So just imagine that wasn't there when you do your formal analysis. We do our formal analysis. The notes I'll give you. We're just going to talk about the Etruscan walls. So how did this survive and why? The Romans destroyed I said this earlier, but if you didn't write it now, you should. Well, you didn't have a reason to. Now you should write this as part of the meaning, that every other Etruscan city besides this one that fell to the Romans was destroyed, totally just destroyed. Not just the people, the men of fighting age were either killed or sent into slavery. The women and children were, exiled or sent into slavery. And then the walls were just knocked down and the buildings destroyed. That's what the Romans would do if you resisted them. I mean, if you surrendered, you might get away with having, a little less harsh treatment. But this city, why it wasn't destroyed utterly, the walls at least, probably the population was, is because it resisted the Romans for decades. The Romans couldn't conquer it. So this also was the last Etruscan city to fall to the Roman army. And out of grudging respect, maybe, or just practical reasons, they preserved the walls and the gate and turned it into a Roman fortification. So the walls, including this gateway of the Etruscan era city, were just incorporated into the newer Roman city. And that's what's still left. You see a section of the walls are Roman era and some are hundreds of years older like this. So that's why it survived. Because it was such a well-defended city, we might as well use part of what they built, right, when the Romans took it over. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole meaning, except for, one more thing. The arch, the rounded arch, for many, you can say for many years, I don't know, when I was in school, for sure, when I was back in, maybe junior high and took world history or high school, we were taught falsely, erroneously, that the Romans invented the rounded arch. Or just most people just call this an arch, but there's several kinds of arches. So you have to be more specific to be accurate. So the rounded, right, archway, many historians believe the Romans invented. Here's proof that they didn't. And we have other sites that the Etruscans left where they just their tombs, if nothing else, and some of their other partial, buried sections of some of the gates of other cities, that were knocked down, but the archway survived and was buried under rubble. And 2,000 years later, some archaeologists found. So we don't have any doubt now. This is the last fact about me, that the Etruscans invented the round arch, not the Romans. They copied it, borrowed it, or what do you want to say, culturally appropriated it from the Romans. However, the Romans, I misspoke, took it or copied it from the Etruscans who came before them and invented the rounded arch. But the Romans did more with it than the Etruscans ever thought of. And we'll talk about that as we go through the Roman slides. So that's plenty on the meaning. There isn't much in the formal analysis. There isn't much, to describe about carved line, except for this one little decorative panel here, alternating columns and discs. I don't know what else you call that. Discs and columns. These might look familiar if you remember, was it last week? Yeah, the Minoan cities had that shape of column. So we know that the Etruscans, before the Romans came along, traded with the Minoans at some point early on in their history, very early, because the Etruscans were around at least close to, well, wait a minute. I misspoke. Now I'm going to be called on this. Nobody called me on it, but you guys might already know. And if you thought about it after the class, you might say, wait a minute. If the Etruscans, the Minoans disappeared 1300 BC, the Etruscans weren't around that early. They came around 1000 BC. So they somehow saw the Greeks, of course, the early Greek city-states we already covered that last week, like Mycenae, remember the gateway of Mycenae, the Lioness gateway. There you saw that kind of column continue to be used in early Greek city-states. So that's where the Etruscans got it from. But you don't have to write that. You can just say, let's do the formal elements, move on to the next slide. It's carved line is limited to just one decorative panel, the one above the main arch. That's it. That's all you have to say. And the other line is visual line. Remember, with architecture, there's always visual line, which is formed by one of the other elements, of course, is always the case with architecture. The shadows from the sun, the natural modeling, right? There isn't any other kind of modeling. What you could add that the visual line applies to the edges of each block of stone. You could say that as well. So there's some carved line, very minimal, and then there's visual line. It's totally balanced and symmetrical. When it was intact, obviously, you remember this wasn't here. So it just was missing one corner here. Otherwise, these are exactly the same height. And so it's balanced left to right, but not top to bottom because of the open archway. It's unbalanced toward the top, although some would say, wait a minute, that's added. That brickwork, you can tell it's the same, right? The same kind of brick added during the Renaissance. That was also an open arch in which archers stood, of course, in the archway to guard that gate during Etruscan times. So even with that, if you imagine that empty, you'd have to say it's unbalanced toward the top because there's still more mass if you draw the line across here above the midline. So it's unbalanced toward the top, but balanced left to right. The largest masses are the two towers, and then it's the gateway, and then the largest arch, the lower archway, if you count that as separate mass. And for space, this is two 50-foot tall towers with about a 30-foot tall open arch or open gateway, you could even say it that way. So again, it's real space only, and that is the two towers about 50 feet tall. Oh, the central section is about 60 feet. So if you want to give the full dimensions, it should be the central portion reaches a height of about 60 feet. The two towers are roughly 50 feet each, and the archway is about a 30-foot high opening. Okay, and then there's the obvious rhythm of the two towers and what little decorative detail there is. You see here on these carved decorations and the two arches. So there's rhythm. It's mostly stable though. This does tilt a little, these two corners. So you could say it's slightly dynamic on the towers, but they're obviously pretty solid. And each wall is stable, as are the corners and edges here of the main entryway. So the really major part of it that is dynamic are the two archways. And then these decorations, I guess just those 5 discs there. Colors, cool gray. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Texture is the real rough texture of the stone. There's no cement textures on this. Okay. Now this is one I'm not cutting from the study list. It's the next must know, and it's 2 words, she wolf, just like it sounds, she wolf. Location is Rome, and the date 500 BC or BCE. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a life-size bronze sculpture of a she-wolf, a mother wolf. And instead of wolf cubs, she's suckling 2 human babies. Well, that is really an important part of the meaning, because most historians, we'll just say it that way, believe that this was a gift. We know it's an Etruscan sculpture. I should probably start with that. Etruscans were the greatest bronze sculptors, I'll repeat this, of the ancient world. Nobody debates that. They had the most realistic looking sculpture of both animals and humans. So again, they were the greatest bronze sculptors of the ancient world. They made this, some Etruscan artist or group of artists. Most historians believe it as a gift to the Romans, because they ruled Rome when this was created. Rome was a city under their rule, and the Romans were constantly chafing at that domination. The Romans didn't want to be dominated by other cultures. They hadn't yet broken free of the Etruscans. So when this was made, most historians believe it was a gift to the Romans from an Etruscan local ruler, who had power over Rome, right? Probably. And it was been placed in one of the major temples or government buildings in Rome, in very early Rome, when Rome didn't look like it did under the empire. This is 500 years before the empire. So why would they do that? Well, the Etruscans, if that theory is correct, it would have been to placate the Romans, to help make them hopefully not want to keep rebelling. In other words, to try and get them to stop resisting Etruscan authority. See, we respect your culture. We give you this sculpture. And this is the other part, and maybe the most important part of the whole meeting, is who were those two human babies? Well, they are the foundation myth of Rome itself. There's no other way to put it. This sculpture is, if it was a gift from the Etruscans to the Romans to placate them while they were under Etruscan rule, was a sign of, gesture, because a better word, gesture of respect to their Roman foundation myth. Now, I've mentioned what a foundation myth is. I hope that will come up at some point on the midterm, right? We talked about it last week with the Greeks, the Greek face painting of Dionysius. So anybody know who these two babies would be if it is the story that's being told of this wolf suckling two human babies is supposed to raise? Yeah, who would they be? Some of you know, right? Sorry.
I don't remember the name, but I do remember the story in the Bible.
Oh, okay, you know the story. Well, that's fine. Maybe you wanted to summarize it. If you feel like it, of course, I will in any case. Okay, the names of these two human babies.
Romulus and Remus.
Yes, Romulus and Remus. Romulus, first name, and the second, this is their first names, of course, Remus, Remus. This is the foundation myth of the Romans told of their own origins. Or you can say origin myth. You could, either word will do. Origin myth is probably better, origin myth, because foundation implies you're building something physical, right? So the origin myth, I'm sorry, either word will be okay on the exam, of the Romans, that they told themselves about how they got started, was that two human babies named Romulus and Remus were abandoned by their parents in the woods where Rome now is. It was forest then. And they were adopted by a she-wolf who raised them as their own. And when they grew up, they founded the city of Rome. Well, that explains everything, is one of my favorite phrases. One of my a historian who was a docent at the De Young Museum used to say about this kind of a story. Well, if you know, I'm sure you all do enough about the Romans to know they were aggressive, they were violent, and they were territorial. All things that could easily have come from having their founders raised like wolf cubs. If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. So it's a story they told themselves, their own origin myth, which many people feel does kind of self-justify, you could say, or describe. Maybe it's just a self-descriptive story, because they were very violent, aggressive, and very territorial, of course. They'd always take other pieces of other countries and eventually became the biggest empire in the ancient world. So what you end up with is, perhaps most historians, and I agree with this, think that this was just sort of showing, some kind of a gesture again of respect towards the Romans to try and placate them. But did it work? No, because not long after this was cast, of course it's bronze, it was a cast sculpture, or not long after it would have been perhaps given to the Romans as a gift. It could have been just made by the Etruscans to illustrate what they thought of the Romans themselves, but it makes sense they could have done that. They gave sculptures to other cities that they ruled, we know that. So all you can say is that at this point, this piece it's in the Vatican. You don't have to know that, but it's not, famous. Well, that's a pretty famous museum. I shouldn't say it's not, but it's owned by the Vatican, the Pope's, home, and so it's on display on a staircase there. But there are some historians, I should mention one last fact about the meeting, we'll do a formal else, that think these two human babies were added later during the Renaissance, because what we know, here's the last fact, this she-wolf was found without any figures below her suckling her, and that begs the question, what would it have been? Almost certainly some kind of living creature was originally part of this sculpture underneath her teats there. So what do we know? We don't know for sure, but most historians are pretty convinced that it originally would, because we've seen other examples of Etruscan sculpture where those two figures were part of it, Romulus and Remus. Whether this particular piece was or not is debatable, but it makes sense that it would have been. Because it's part of the story that they were aware of from having ruled over the early Roman city. Well, it was a small city back then, 500 years, so it was 250 years old by that time, Rome. Okay, let's do the form analysis. Cool color, of course. This is almost a bluish color, actually. It's an unusual color for bronze. And then we have the rhythm of the wolf's body, hind and forward legs, the ears, the face, and of course the two human babies, their arms, legs, heads. Really good cement texture. As I said, the Etruscans were the best of all the ancient bronze sculptors of the ancient world. And that's in the Carveline. It's, of course, what was used to create the fur on the neck there, and the face of the she-wolf, and the bodies, hair and skin and face details of the two human babies. The rhythm is obvious with the repeated parts. Oh, I already mentioned that. Let's see, is it mostly stable? Yes, it is. Look carefully, because the legs and the body, primarily of the she-wolf, front legs anyway, and the overall alignment of her body is almost totally stable. And of the two, we don't know which would be Romulus and which is Remus. If these are, accurately reproducing the original figures that would have been below the wolf. But one of the two human babies is pretty much stable, and the other one, even the upper half of his body, is only his legs are dynamic. So it's mostly stable with some dynamic detail. Balanced, yes, I would say so. With the two human babies right in the middle there, if you draw the line here. And when you add, the front and back sections and the sets of two legs on either end, the she-wolf is roughly balanced. So it's roughly balanced left to right, but you can make the case that it's unbalanced toward the top because of the solid mass of the she-wolf's body. It would be larger than the empty space and the two human babies below. And then we have, let's see, what am I forgetting here? Texture, I already mentioned. Oh, modeling. There's no technique for modeling. Oh, and for space, it's a real three-dimensional object with a life-size wolf's body and two life-size human babies. There's no techniques for modeling. In the museum, of course, again, the modeling is just the museum. Okay, we begin the Roman slides now. This slide has I'm going to go further than I usually do, very high probability, I won't say definitely will be, but very high probability of being on the midterm. So it's our next must know. Augustus of Prima Porta. Augustus of Prima Porta. Okay, Augustus is Augustus. Augustus, the name of the first Roman emperor, that's who this is. Of Prima Porta is one word. Primaporta. And the location is Rome, and the date 20 BC or BCE. So there's a lot to say about this. So I'll say it slowly and then repeat the most important points at the end. I'm going to give you guys, I think I haven't said this yet to this class. I have my other two classes, just to give you a little less stress, or, you keep from getting too anxious about the midterm, even though it's 3 weeks away. You aren't going to have to remember everything or even most of all the facts I give you and the meaning on each of these must-know slides. Only 6 facts about each one. And I give you guys well more than that, don't I? When some of the slides, there are only maybe 6 or 8 facts, but this one, there's going to be more than that. So you should take thorough notes, but then when you're studying, you would have, of course, you have the notes in front of you, right? But maybe when you mark your notes up for use during the exam, the open book, open note exam, you'd want to just make note of the 6 facts that are most important or most interesting or easiest to remember. Okay, just so you know, I'm not going to expect you to write 2 pages or a page even on each of the slide essay questions. There are only 3 slide essay questions on the midterm, and it's only a 1-hour exam, but you'll have till midnight if you need extra time. All right, so here we go. Here are the main facts to start with, the most important. This is a sculpture done from life of the first Roman emperor, Augustus Caesar. Caesar is CEASER, I believe that, right? You don't have to worry about the spelling of any word that's not on the syllabus, right? Augustus, you can just say Augustus. That's how everybody addressed him. He was the first Roman emperor. Now, don't write this, but some of you might say, wait a minute, what about Julius? Julius Caesar was his uncle, and he wanted to become the first Roman emperor. He declared himself that way, but before the Senate voted whether or not to agree, because they were, at that time, the Senate actually had power, and there weren't any Roman emperors before. Julius tried to become, you know what happened to Julius Caesar, right? He was stabbed to death 39 times in the Senate. So he never made it to become the first Roman emperor. So this guy was, again, the first Roman emperor, and he founded the Roman Empire. Now, you might say, all by himself, he built the empire? No, of course, we don't mean that. We mean he became the first unequivocally sole ruler. That's what an emperor is. He ruled by himself with, of course, some advisors, like a cabinet, and he would consult the Senate, and they might have some influence, but he had all the power. Now, that's the foundation, considered to be the foundation of the Roman Empire, which facts are even they're broader than who he was, but they're part of the meaning of this slide. When we say the Roman Empire, we're talking about what he started in 30 BC. And he lived, this part you definitely should write, ruled longer than any other Roman emperor, way longer, 45 years he was the emperor on the throne, you could say, of the Roman Empire. That's most people's whole lifetime back then, certainly for the poor and working class, and a few people made it past 50. So he ruled for 45 years, nearly half a century. So the longest reigning Roman emperor. And he started the Pax Romana. That's not a minor detail. And that's the two words are Roman for, Latins for the peace of Rome. Some of you know this if you know your world history, but if you don't, you should be writing two words, capital P-A-X, and Romana, second word R-O-M-A-N-A. Pax Romana meant a period of over 200 years. He started this period of peace, stability, and prosperity. Why did that matter? Why didn't they have that before? No, they had a bunch of civil wars before he came along, and he won 2 of them. This is a pretty important fact, pretty remarkable person, and you'd have to rate him in the top 100 of people in the history of the world. Most historians do, because of the legacy of what the Roman Empire itself left, which we've already started to talk about and touched on at the beginning of today's lecture. And without him, it might not have happened. Why? Because the Roman Empire was an empire, but it wasn't a unified, completely stable and all powerful, gigantic empire like it became under him until he came along. Why? Because they had a series of civil wars, one of which was the one he won. He didn't start it. When his uncle was killed, he sought revenge on the murderers. Makes sense, right? And he won that civil war. And then while he was emperor, a certain guy named Mark Antony, you've heard of him, and some woman named Cleopatra, the 2 of them became a couple, of course, a power couple. They were married, and they tried to overthrow the Roman Empire, or at least kick the Romans out of the Eastern Mediterranean, from Egypt all the way up into Greece. They were going to make that their empire. So a second civil war happened a few years after he became emperor, and he won that war. Obviously, you know what happened to Cleopatra. I assume you do, right? She committed suicide as the Romans under Augustus were closing in on her. So, and her husband had already committed suicide. So he won 2 civil wars. That's the bottom line. And then peace was a result. He was extremely well respected, and the evidence that he was not only respected, but even beloved by, let's say, a majority. They didn't take polls back then, but the evidence is very clear that a majority of citizens of Rome, not just the city, we're talking about mostly citizens anywhere in the empire who trace their ancestry to Italy, would be called citizens of Rome. So all the citizens of Rome, including many who weren't even citizens in other provinces, where they got peace, stability, and prosperity at the cost of their independence, yes, but under the Romans. He was beloved, and the proof, I'm sorry, I meant to leave it on this image. That's Cupid. That little baby is Cupid, one of the minor Greek gods. And of course, the Romans adopted the Greek god. So Greek and Roman god of love, one that's symbolic of, the feelings of love. So the people of the Roman Empire, most of them, let's just say, were grateful to Augustus for bringing them peace and prosperity and stability and putting an end to all those civil wars. After the Pax Romana ended, about 200 years after his reign, the Roman Empire slowly began to decline. So he brought them that period called Pax Romana. So those are all important things, but there is one more fact, which is what's on his armor. Well, that's his son, adopted son. I mean, I'll make sure we say that correctly. He had several, I think it was 3 heirs who could have become the next emperor. They were in his will, and they all died mysteriously. Some think they were killed by his wife. His wife, you have to know her name if you want to know. It's Livia. Actually, let me see. I sometimes include a slide of her villa. Yes, I do. So you do need to know her name. I changed around some of the slides, of course, each semester. Livia, Livia, was his wife, his second wife. They were both from a second marriage. From their first marriage. So his children, biological children, all died mysteriously. So there is some kind of suspicion that maybe someone was getting rid of them so that her son, Livia's only son, no, it wasn't only son, that's right. Oldest, sorry, I meant oldest son, that's him right there, would therefore be the only one left alive to inherit the empire. So he became the second Roman emperor. So you should add his name in your notes. His name was Tiberius, name for the river, the Tiber that runs through Rome. Tiberius. I'll spell it for you. Tiberius. So that's showing on this sculpture, which of course was commissioned by Augustus himself, by whoever it was a really talented sculptor, of course. This is a world famous piece of sculpture, showing that he was announcing to the world that, okay, my own biological children may have died, but I have a successor. I've named my adopted son as my successor, who was Tiberius. And then the very last thing about this that is not minor is, what does the title mean? Well, if you translate it literally from Italian, it means the main gate. So Augustus above the main gate, well, that's probably what this is. But again, there's a debate on this. This sculpture could have been carved for one of 2 locations or purposes and placed in one of 2 locations. Most historians, including me and all of my Italian historians, believe this, that this is the first of a series of copies. Later on, the copies could have been placed in other parts of the Roman Empire, but that the first one was probably intended to be above the main gate to the city of Rome. Now, Rome was such a big city, 2 million people. Even today, that's a big city. I mean, nothing on earth came close before that. The next biggest city was Babylon. A few years is like 500,000. That's a pretty good sized city in the ancient world. But Rome had 2 million. First city in the world to reach 1 million, then doubled again during this Pax Romana because of all the prosperity and people coming there for a better life. So Rome had 2 million people at some point. Before he left, it was probably a little over 1 million. So it's a huge city, but they had a main gate you had to pass through to get into the city if you didn't already live there. And the evidence is strong. Just say many historians always use that phrase to be fairly accurate about it. So we don't know for sure, but many historians believe that this was placed above the main gate, which was on the north end of the city wall. So you would have to pass underneath Augustus, who's almost like greeting you with his raised arm and also announcing that he is the most powerful man on earth. There's no question during his lifetime he would have had that role as the most powerful man running the most powerful empire at that time in the world. There were other smaller empires outside the Roman Empire, but they were not as strong or anywhere near as large or populous as the Roman Empire. Some historians believe the Roman Empire had 45% of the entire human race under one government. That's never happened before or since. The next closest is the British Empire, which had about 3/8 of the world's population at the height of their power in the late 1800s. They were a pretty large empire too. Geographically, they were bigger than the Romans, but in terms of population, the Romans had huge portion of the human race under one government, which had never happened before. And it lasted over 500 years too. A pretty long time, even in the ancient world. So he was the most powerful man on the earth. He was full of confidence, and he's showing it in his expression and his gesture. And if this was on the main gate, you would be passing under the statue, and there's all that, meaning symbolizing who he was. You kind of at least had to notice, even if you didn't feel the same way as most people did and adore the fact that this guy brought you peace and prosperity. Okay, formal analysis. He's in contrapposto, and that's not an essential part of the meaning because that's not the most important fact about, or one of the most important facts, but he is standing with the weight on this leg, and this leg is forward just enough to be what's called the right loose leg. And of course, one arm's down, it's holding a spear. It's missing the tip or point, which probably disappeared a long time ago. And then the other arm is raised, and the spine would form a gentle S curve. So let's do the 9 elements here. You could add that as part of the meaning if you want, but you have plenty of facts already about that meaning. Oh, I didn't say what other theory there is. Again, you don't need to add this, but you might be interested at least to hear. Where else could it have been placed? Well, copies we know were made and sent to other parts of the Roman Empire for local rulers to have, above maybe the gate to their city, or let's see, subsequent, there we go. That's a word you don't hear very often. Subsequent Roman emperors would sometimes take copies of this statue to place in the gardens of their own villas. We know at least 2 or 3 that did that. But that's after the original piece. It just makes sense. The original piece was created to make a statement above some main public place or site, and that most likely would have been the gate of the main gate, the city of Rome. Okay, formal analysis. It's a warm color of yellow marble, which they loved using, and well, actually the Greeks did too. So that is a warm color, even though it looks a bit cool and gray here. So you could say it looks both warm and cool. Roughly the armor and his head are more cool looking in this photo. So that's what you have to look at. I wouldn't take points off if you said that, but actually the whole piece had a kind of a yellowish, light yellow, warm marble color. The similar texture, obviously superb on that carved, and it's all done with carved line. That's the only kind of line, of course, on the armor, on his robes, on his muscles, his face, even the baby cherub there, Cupid. The largest mass is pretty easy, him, and then it's a close call, but I would say it's probably the spear. And then maybe you could say the base or the Cupid. I think the base is the 3rd largest. That would make the baby angel there the 4th largest mass. For space, he was 6 feet tall. He was a tall man. That was unusually tall in the ancient world. So it's a full life-size figure of an adult human, 6 feet tall. But there is overlapping, obviously, the armor over his body, the robes over his armor, his hand over the spear. There is no modeling. It's in a museum. I believe it's also in the Vatican Museum. I think it is, or you don't have to know where. It's only the lighting from the museum that creates the artificial modeling. It's not natural sunlight modeling. And then it is almost entirely stable. He's standing upright and he's pointing with, okay, this arm is somewhat dynamic, and the top of his head is always the case with a human being, but he's standing pretty much upright. And you don't notice the S curve as much with a piece like this where it's not in the nude, because the armor, kind of overlaps that. And so the spear is almost upright too. So this is mostly stable. Balanced, of course, it's an intact human figure, right? And then the rhythm is obvious too, with the folds of his robes, the hands and arms, legs, feet, and of course the head. The month of August, you should already know that, right? But I don't know how much, what it is they do tell people in history classes anymore. World history classes. Yeah, the month of August was named after Augustus, by the way. So there's another bit of influence that 2,000 years later, his rule still has in the modern world. Okay. Now this one is also important enough that I won't cut it from the study guide, I should say. The next must know, 3 words, Pont du Gard. That's P-O-N-T, and then capital, sorry, doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase. The second word I meant is D-U. It's a French spelling, by the way. And then the 3rd word is G-A-R-D. Again, P-O-N-T, first word, middle word D-U, and then G-A-R-D, Pont du Gard. But now in the syllabus, you'll see, of course, when it's on the test, you'll have your syllabus in front of you. So don't forget and say just France, you would get points off for that. There are several of these aqueducts throughout France, as well as many other parts of Europe, which the Romans ruled. So Nîmes, N-I-M-E-S, is the city. I've been here. I've seen this thing. It's pretty amazing. Nîmes, or Nimes, as some people in the Midwest would say, France. So both the city and the country are the location. 15 BC or BCE. So Let's start with what is an aqueduct. That's a definition. You see, it's below the list of things. I know I forgot to put the S on thing. Thing invented by the ancient Romans, obviously it should be plural. So below the sixth item, the road system, is aqueducts. Don't need to spell that. These words are on your list of terms. So here we go. An aqueduct is a system for carrying water from the mountains to a city, invented by the Romans, comma, a system for carrying water from the mountains to a city, invented by the Romans, comma, in which gravity is used to conduct the water through a series of conduits. Sorry, it's a long definition. In which gravity is used, I'll repeat it one more time at the end, in which gravity is used to conduct the water through a series of conduits. It would be on each level, 3 of them, a series of conduits, not pipes. It's different than that. Conduits, just like the word sounds, but with a UITS, through a series of conduits supported by arches. All Roman aqueducts had that in common. No matter what the material was, they're almost always stone, but there are different kinds of stone and size of the aqueduct, or whether the aqueduct served just to conduct water, or like this one, it was also a bridge, and it still is functioning today as a bridge in southern France. That's where this is located. So I'll say this was I'll rephrase it. This is the longest section of a Roman aqueduct that has survived. It's about 1/3 of a mile long. It goes well off the edge of the slides here, and well into this hillside. It's about 1/3 of a mile long, between 1/4 and 1/3. So you could just say over 1/4 mile long. All the other segments of aqueducts are maybe 1 or 2 blocks long in places like Istanbul. You'll see a couple of those later on when I show slides of other places that relate to the syllabus, my own slides. Okay, so this is the longest remaining piece of a Roman aqueduct that is intact, meaning this section is intact. It doesn't mean the aqueduct, most of that's gone. It was 20 miles long when it was completed. And it brought water from the mountains. And some of you know, if you know your geography, that would be the Alps, right? The biggest mountain chain in Europe, all the way into one of the biggest Roman cities. Nimes was the largest city in that was then the colony. It's not France, it was called Gaul then, but you don't have to know that. You can say what was the Roman colony that today is France. In that colony, the biggest city was this one. That this aqueduct served that city. Some historians think it had 200,000 people, at least 100,000 in Roman times. That's not a small town today, but back then that was a very large city. So they needed a lot of water. And so they probably had more than one aqueduct. But what we know is this is the largest section to have survived. That you can just say over 1/4 of a mile, because I think it's actually a little less than 1/3. But what I said is part of the meaning that it's still used the way the Romans have built it, that this bottom level is actually a foot and vehicular, can't say that word fast, vehicular bridge. Now, buses are banned from it and large vehicles, but I've seen small, cars and motorbikes, motorcycles and bicycles and groups of students walking in a field trip. I've spent a few hours sitting looking at this with what I'll call a sunset enhancer with a couple of friends of mine from that part of France that wanted me to see what it looks like when the sun rises over it, or was it sunset? I can't remember. But anyway, it's quite a sight to watch this thing come to life during the daytime. It still functions as a footbridge and small vehicle bridge or vehicular bridge. This roadbed is that well built. So there's a roadbed on the bottom level with the conduit beside the roadbed, of course. Then there are just the conduits for the water, of course, on the upper 2 levels. So you can add how much water it could carry, especially during the period when it was raining and or snow was melting and water was constantly passing through this 20 miles into the city's, of course, reservoir. Obviously, it's where it would end up in. The Romans almost never had a bad problem with water distribution that far back. And yes, aqueducts are still used. If you didn't know that, I said it earlier at the introduction of tonight's lecture, that we still have the same system, only of course they're much bigger pieces of reinforced concrete, right? the one they call the California Aqueduct that takes water from the Sacramento River Delta down to Southern California. Pretty impressive. This system is exactly the same as the Romans, except probably it's now electronically controlled with computers, of course, as to how much water, of course, with the drought, we have to do that. Anyway, so the Romans invented a system for, keeping a city supplied with water that no one's really improved on in over 2,000 years. All right, so let's do a formal analysis. Is it balanced? Yes, I would say no question if you drew the line down the middle of what there is, and depends on where you want to draw the midline. But if I drew it right here, roughly halfway up the second row of arches, you could make the case it's balanced roughly both ways. The rhythms are obvious with the arches, and these are called piers. That's probably a good word to know. That's Piers, and it might sound like something at the edge of a lake or river. No, this is the other kind of pier that supports the weight of whatever's above it. The Romans used arches with piers to support. This is massive. We're going to wait till I tell you how tall it is. It's surprisingly big. Okay, so again, we're still doing the formal elements. The dynamic part is the arches. The stable part is the piers. The largest mass, pretty easy. It's the bottom row of arches, or the bottom section, you could just say. And then the second largest, obviously, mass would be the middle section. The smallest mass would be the top section. Space, this is where I already mentioned the length, that it's over a quarter of a mile long, or you could say between a quarter and a third of a mile long, and 165 feet tall. That's a remarkably tall piece of stonework. There's only one other building that I know of in the ancient Roman Empire that rivaled it, and that's the Coliseum, which we will see after the break. We'll get that far tonight. So what we have here is a structure, the equivalent of more of a taller height than a 16-story skyscraper. It's 165 feet high from the riverbed, foundation there. Whoops, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. Get out of there. Okay, I'm just trying to show you how this goes down into the water. What we're talking about, I don't know if that measurement is maybe down. It's not a very deep river. We could see that from this slide. Well, at least when this picture was taken. So it's hard to know. Is it 145 feet above? And probably not that deep, the piers. But regardless, it's a structure that went from the foundation all the way to the top of a height of 165 feet. Okay, and then we have the modeling. Of course, it's just the shadows, natural modeling from the sun. And here the lines are visual around the arches, right? I don't see any other kind of line. And a carved line is not visible here. A warm color, and the texture is the real rough texture of stone. Not sure what kind of stone. It's not brick, and there is some brick facing on the stone, I think, but all you have to say is rough, real texture. Just keep it simple and say stone, which is what most aqueducts would be. Otherwise, with brick, it's not as stable, as sturdy. It wouldn't last this long in this good a condition. Okay, I already said balance. Yeah, I think I did cover everything. Okay, now we're going to talk about one more must know, and I'm going to make a decision here as to whether. Yeah, here we go. It's in a different order. So I said I reserve the right every class at the beginning of the semester to maybe present slides that are within the same topic, not alter the order of the topics, but of the slides within this topic. So take a look down at the bottom of week 7, okay? But this makes sense to do it now because it's about the right amount of time before we take our break to do one more slide. It's called, this slide, as a must know, the House of the Dionysian Cult. Fresco. It's a fresco. It's probably obvious. Dionysian, again, is Dionysian. We already covered who he was, right, last week. He was the ancient Greek and Roman god of wine, and I would say debauchery or partying, whichever word you prefer. But this goes way beyond who Dionysus was. This is a disgusting display. You have to use that word. You could just say this illustrates a very controversial cult called the Dionysian Cult, which worshipped their belief, just say their belief, taught them that it was okay in their religious ceremonies to abuse young children, male and female, boys and girls, young ones. And here's an unfortunate one right here. When I looked at this is actually, I think it's my own slide. Anyway, it's very similar to the one I took. This poor little girl is about to be abused in a way that you don't even want to know, right? By adults. And even in Roman times, that was against the law. They didn't wink at or accept or allow, there's a better word. They didn't allow that legally. This was an outlawed cult. They were an illegal cult because they practiced abuse of all kinds on young children as well as on unwilling captives like, slaves or women kidnapped perhaps. I mean, it was a disgusting group of people. And this was one of their secret meeting rooms in the basement of a villa in Pompeii. It's in Pompeii, right? Everybody knows what that was, the city buried by the volcano eruption. And it was found about 250 years ago. It's one of the first villas found and excavated. So now you can see the railings here. I mean, you can walk right up, get pretty close to it. And it's very beautifully done in terms of technical skill, but when you know what you're looking at, it's disgusting because she's probably being told by this woman who's obviously forcing her into doing something she doesn't want, what to say in some kind of a chant or prayer, or cult, whatever ritual. And then she's going to get abused after that. And then we have here somebody, we can't even see the top of the female above him, getting a massage, and I'm certain more than that. And we have probably a slave girl doing a dance here. And then we have all kinds of, obviously food and music. I mean, these were not just people celebrating or partying like most upper class Romans. These were obviously upper class Romans, if that's not obvious. The size of their house tells us that. But also the Dionysian cult wasn't something practiced by the average working or middle class family. It was an upper class, corrupt, illegal cult. And this was one of their main meeting rooms in one of the most prosperous cities in Rome. So they probably had several chapters in Rome itself, meeting places, I should say. So each big Roman city may or may not have had a chapter. We know they did in Rome, and we know this city, Pompeii, had a very active chapter. And they all died during that eruption of the volcano. So that's the whole meaning. Frescoes, one more fact, sorry, very important. The Romans were the greatest fresco artists of the ancient world. Again, nobody debates that. The proof is right in front of us. If you get up close here, look at the detail on the expressions. This person here may or may not be related to that little girl. And some of these people were this, deranged, that they would donate or force, in other words, their own children into this cult. And of course, that got them cred, or what do you want to call it, points with the head of each of these chapters of this sick cult. That's really the only word for it. So the details of the expression on their faces, their emotions, of course, the clothing, the skin, the hair, and then the color. The color is they invented new colors that didn't exist and have been copied ever since Pompeii was rediscovered. These colors, the red itself is called Pompeii red. So you could add that to part of the meaning, but it's also part of the formal elements. So let's do that now. Let's do the formal composition. It's all warm on the wall, the background behind each human figure. But of course, all the skin tones, as all human skin tones are, warm. The clothing is a mixture of warm and cool. But most of it, because of the amount of flesh shown here, obviously, and many of the robes are warm colored, and the whole background it's more warm than cool. The rhythm is the human body parts, of course, of arms, hands, heads, legs, feet, as well as the robes they're wearing. So a lot of rhythm. It's mostly stable. Each figure is mostly sitting or standing upright. Obviously, the exceptions are like this guy here, and the somewhat, I guess, this man leaning over on a piece of sculpture, it looks like. And just that dancer's upper arms, but most of the figures are standing or sitting upright, so it's mostly stable. These are life-size figures, but they do overlap. So for space, they are life-size figures of human bodies which overlap each other, and their clothing overlaps their bodies. The modeling, very strong, right? We already said the similar texture is superb, right? And so is the modeling, especially on their robes. The lines are all thin outlines here. Each panel is roughly balanced, right? Each panel. I mean, you can't see the second figure behind this woman, but there's at least 2 figures in each panel, right? So they're roughly balanced, but you could make the case they're unbalanced if you drew the line across the middle of each panel, unbalanced toward the bottom, because there's more empty space at the top. And then let's see, am I forgetting anything? Textures, I think I did that. Yeah. Oh, the masses. Well, they're pretty much each of these figures roughly equal. The male figures are the largest masses, and then most of the female figures are slightly shorter, as was the case among the Roman population. So you could just say there are a variety of masses. Each panel has, you know, it looks like at least one adult. I mean, sorry, at least 2 adults, and they would be roughly the same size as each other. So I don't think you can really say that there's a larger. You might make the case this woman, she's taller than the other figure next to her. But the panels are broken up into so many different segments that it's hard to say there's, you know, a consistent way of saying this is the single largest mass. So there are just a variety of masses within each panel is how I would write it, if it is on the midterm. Okay, we don't have time for another one before the break. We want to take.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Yeah,
Are these
please.
are these colors the originals or?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I know that color of red. It's almost hypnotic to look at. I know that sounds odd, but if you go into houses from the colonial time back east on the East Coast, you know, not just plantation houses, but some of the even abolitionist houses, right? But people were abolitionists in the 1700s. There were plenty. John Adams never, ever wanted to see slavery allowed. And he almost just walked out of the convention, the Constitutional Convention, when they wouldn't put that clause in the Constitution. Anyway, his house and a few others are New England, you know, and all over the East Coast had these colors on at least one wall of, you know, their rooms, just the color, because it was so enticing. That's about when Pompeii was recently discovered. It had been discovered in the mid to late 1700s, like 1760 or so. So by American Revolution, that was still news. You know, Pompeii, you know, people were just learning what it was, what happened to it. And the colors were being reproduced in England because it was British archaeologists that found it first. So those are every one of the colors, yes, on the figures of the humans, their clothing. It's all original. It survived. Why? Because intact, the colors, I mean, because it was buried in an airtight, right, space as a basement underneath the villa that itself was covered under the explosion. It wasn't the lava that it killed the people. It was the poison gas and the ash which suffocated, and then the lava came after that. So it was encased, you know what I'm saying? It like a piece of time, you know, encased for 2000, almost 2000 years, airtight underground for centuries. And so when they rediscovered Pompeii, these pieces, these wall frescoes, were hundreds of them all over Pompeii, are still almost as sharp and bright as the day they were made. Pretty impressive. Yeah, so those are original colors. Any other questions before we take a break?
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's say 8:20, because it's just, what is it, 8:01 now. So I'm going to pause the recording and I'll see you guys all in about 18 minutes. Okay, so all right. Welcome back. Exactly 20 minutes. We had a good break. So now we're going to resume with slides of ancient Rome. Whoa. Nice doing that sometimes. This is the next must know. I mentioned it before the break, and it's fascinating once you know what it is that's unusual, even as for Roman fresco work about this. This is it's again, I know it's from last week, so what we're going to do is, you know, intersperse something from the list that's under March 7th with early next week. But actually, it's a good thing to go ahead and get as far forward as we can by, you know, the end of this evening, 9:25 or so, or we usually end about 9:15, don't we? Yes, right, thereabouts. We'll see where we are, because that means the less slides that we still have to cover of new Roman art slides, the more time for review. And I do want to show you my own slides of just the city of Rome, and still do a decent review. So let's go as far forward as we can tonight. Okay, so this is now actually under week 7, March 14. Second from the bottom, Villa Livia, Livia, wall fresco. 4 words, Villa Livia wall fresco, Rome. The little c means we don't have the exact year, but it's about 10 BC. I mentioned who she was, but of course you wouldn't necessarily have needed to write that on the notes you took for the slide, the meaning of the Augustus of Prima Porta.
Augustus' wife?
Of Prima Porta. So let's start now. Here's the first fact, okay, is what I'm saying. You should add or have, I mean, in your notes about the meaning of this slide, which is she was Augustus's wife, second wife. It's important to say second because I mentioned it. They were both married before. He had several biological children, and all but one of them, I think, his daughter, died under mysterious circumstances after he married Livia. So there's no proof that she had anything to do with their deaths, but the suspicious circumstances lead some historians to believe she may have had a hand in getting rid of his biological children, because they would have been first in line to become the successor or second Roman emperor after Augustus. So once they were gone, that left her son. So she's the mother of the second Roman emperor. Her oldest son was Augustus's adopted son. And his name again was Tiberius. So you should have written that before, of course, because it was on the armor of the statue of Augustus in Prima Porta. Again, Tiberius. So she was the mother of the second Roman emperor, Tiberius, who was adopted by Augustus. And his name again is Tiberius, Tiberius. Okay, so why are we looking at a wall painting in her house? Well, it's an important fact to mention that Roman emperors and their wives usually each had their own separate house. They lived apart. Not all of them, but most of them did. The vast majority chose to live in separate households with their own servants and family members, maybe in other extra rooms and, guest rooms and all. And we're talking about the upper class, of course, here, the ruling class of the Roman Empire. Of course, they would have had plenty of, resources, financial recourse to big villas with multiple rooms. And this is on the wall of one of the main rooms at Livia's villa, which would be in Rome. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a fresco showing the surroundings of Rome. Hang on, I need something in my throat. This would have been on the wall of Livia's villa, which is in the city of Rome, but it depicts a scene that you could only have seen on the outskirts of Rome. Pretty much the only way to say it. This is what the city of Rome was surrounded by, mountains on the west facing the ocean. So this is like a view towards the western mountain ranges that surrounded Rome. Well, not exactly surrounded, but that were around, just say around the outskirts of Rome. And it's a morning. It should be obvious it's early morning, because look at how masterful this is. That's why I chose this slide as one of the two, actually 3 Roman frescoes that are on the syllabus that are must knows, because it's probably one of the most skilled images to depict the Roman skill. And I'll say this twice. This is one of the best examples to depict the Roman skill at fresco painting, especially landscapes. Look at what we're looking at. We're looking at the difference between a 2-dimensional fresco and nearly a 3-dimensional one. Of course, it's 2-dimensional, it's on a flat wall. Here we have diminishing size and, of course, overlapping. Atmospheric perspective par excellence. That's exactly what, of course, the morning light, the blue hazy look in the mountains in the distance would be like in the early morning hours. And then this might be the most amazing thing of all. What's going on here is that's foreshortening, of course, on the garden wall, which is concrete, by the way. Look how modern that looks. But some historians have pointed out that the Romans must have figured out the concept of scientific perspective without knowing the technique. The technique was invented by Italians in the Renaissance. Nobody debates that. The actual first time you have diagonal lines, the definition, right? That's the definition you want to know. It won't be taken off the list of terms that you might be tested on for the midterm. right? I already defined it in detail when we covered the 9 elements. So you know how scientific perspective is supposed to be, carried out. Well, we know they didn't do diagonal lines or a vanishing point. This has been X-ray. This is, of course, it's a well-known fresco that's been in all kinds of books, magazines, documentaries. So there were no diagonal lines. There's no vanishing point. But we think that the artists, in some of the most skilled Roman fresco artists, must have understood. So repeating this is a major fact about the meaning of this slide. They must have understood the concept behind scientific perspective without having the technique. In other words, they did a freehand approximation of scientific perspective. What we state that when we get to the meaning. And then the only other part of this is that Romans loved their gardens. And she had a very, very lush garden that she, of course, had servants help her with, but she would often, tend to many of the plants. Fruits and vegetables from all over the Roman Empire, because the climate in Italy wasn't that different than it was in many other parts of the Roman Empire. It's all Mediterranean, right? Pretty much, except when you get up to, the British Isles and Scotland, that part of the empire, of course, the climate being different, they wouldn't have had the same plant life. But all around the Mediterranean, she could have had imported all kinds of exotic fruits and vegetables. And you see some evidence of that in the walls here. And then one of my favorite details, this looks like my backyard fence. Looks like the redwood, cross hatching, lattice thing, right? A fence that you see so much of in the Bay Area. It's a wooden lattice fence, which then opens into a small side garden. And then the main garden is over this concrete wall. It's a remarkably modern looking scene compared to what other ancient cultures were capable of in their fresco work. So that's why we say the Romans were the greatest fresco artists of the ancient world. No debating that. Okay, formal analysis. It's balanced, obviously, very carefully, left to right. I consider the sky having a mass, but if you don't, then you'd have to say it's weighted toward the bottom. I already mentioned what the elements of space techniques in the composition are, but I'll restate, obviously you've got foreshortening here on this wall, overlapping, diminishing size on the trees, right? Some of the trees go further back. And of course, you've got atmospheric perspective, and the only way to write again is a free hand approximation of scientific perspective. Simulated texture, again, it would have to be excellent because they were the best fresco painters in the ancient world. So it's super sharp and realistic on the trees, on the fruits. Let's get up close here. You see those. And even on the mountains, considering that this is a distant scene with the, rocky crags at the top of each, or the crest, I guess is the right phrase, of each part of the mountain range. And then also on that lattice fence in the concrete wall, very realistic. And of course, the modeling is also very strong and very sharp and realistic on all the objects. The largest mass, well, I guess it's the mountains if you look at them as one mass, and then it's up to you to decide. It could be the 2 garden walls, but they were roughly about equal, right? Although this one's missing a section, so I suppose it could be the concrete wall second, and then the wooden lattice wall. But some people think the trees are grouped in separate masses, is several trees in each mass. If you see it that way, then it's up to you to decide what the second and third largest masses are. And then we have dynamic. No, well, it's both. Okay, yeah, but the fences are stable and the tree trunks are stable, although the branches are a mixture depending on which part of the tree you're looking. Each tree is, this one's obviously mostly dynamic, so it's a mixture. Some of the trees are stable, some are dynamic. The mountains are definitely dynamic, but the walls, the whole bottom portion is mostly stable. Colors are cool on the concrete wall, and on the mountains, of course, bluish, hazy look. But the trees, they're mostly green. But the fruits are warm, and the wooden fence or latticing, the bottom is warm. So it's more cool than warm. Obviously, there's the rhythm of the repeated shapes of the fruits, the tree trunks, the branches, the tops of the mountain, right? And then the latticing here and the fence at the bottom. The lines are all thin outlines. And I think that's it. So let's see, modeling, I think I covered it all. Textures, yeah, okay. Here we go. Now, this is the third in a series of three. I know it's unusual, so obviously I'm going to cut one or two of these three from the study list, but right now I haven't decided which ones will remain on the list of terms to know for the midterm. We'll do that next week. So this is the next must know, and it's called, this is back up under week 6, March 7th. It's called Cityscape, one word, Cityscape. And the location is the town in Italy, Boscoreale, Boscoreale, 25 BC. So what do we see here? We see a not quite as skilled artist's rendering of us. Well, the title tells us a cityscape is very different than, of course, that's why I like to juxtapose these one after the other. That's a landscape, obviously not a cityscape, and this is the other type of outdoor painting, which the Romans were skilled at, but this artist didn't quite have the skill that last one did. You could just say this artist wasn't as skilled as the most talented Roman fresco painters in depicting space. I'll say why when we do the formal elements, but you could just say other than that, the depictions or techniques of how to depict space, which aren't as realistic here as they were in that last slide. Other than that fact, it is very well done fresco. Well, what are we looking at? Obviously, it's some kind of a city scene from a city. It's Rome. And not only is it Rome, we know exactly where. So this is a fresco on the country villa. Boscoreale is a small town, not Rome or a suburb of Rome. It's not a neighborhood or district of Rome. It's a separate town somewhere outside Rome. So this is a wealthy Roman, he's clearly a nobleman, we know who he was, a Roman nobleman who owned at least 2 villas that we know of. Why? Because each one depicted the other villa on the wall of their opposite villa. I don't know any other way to say it. This was the wall of a country villa that this nobleman owned, his country villa. So he painted his city villa as a fresco on the wall of his country villa. And guess what he had painted, you can guess, on the wall of his city villa, which is this right here. We're going to talk about what these objects are. Inside there on one of the walls of his urban or city villa was a fresco of his country villa or a landscape around his country villa. So, the phrase be Zen, be where you are, Zen philosophy, at least supposedly emphasized that. This guy wasn't very Zen. Don't write that. He obviously was thinking about where he wasn't when he was in each of his 2 villas. It seems strange. Okay, so what you have here is the entrance to his urban villa. And this is really remarkably beautifully detailed. And that's where the skill comes in. The bronze doors, that's right there, proves how wealthy he was. And the marble entry hall here to get into the rest of the villa. And then this column, this indicates extreme wealth because that's actual gold that you're seeing. It's called gilt. That's not G-U-I-L-T. The other meaning of G-I-L-T, meaning a gold, actual gold hammered onto something, not just painted, like gold dust. This is actual gold, which encrusts, I don't know any other word you could say, is used to decorate or is encrusted on the surface of a red marble. It's a very rare color of marble. That color of red marble would be, again, a sign of his wealth. But as if those 2 things aren't enough to indicate how wealthy he was, look at this. This is the biggest indicator of his, or symbol of his, extreme wealth. Glass in the windows. Only a small percentage, 5%, most historians think of all the upper classes, of all the houses in Rome, of course those would only be the upper classes, could afford glass in their windows. It was really unusual. No other culture before the Romans would have tried to use glass for windows. They would have used them for, vases and glasses, drinking glasses. So the glass in the window is a final indicator of his wealth. We know where it is because that is the Circus Maximus, which is the largest outdoor amphitheater in the Roman Empire. It could hold over 200,000 people. It's where the chariot races were held. It literally, the 2 words, just like it sounds, 2 words phonetic for it, was circus, like, the modern word circus, had nothing to do with what the word means now, nothing at all. Circus Maximus, meaning the largest circus. A circus was a racetrack. in ancient Rome. So this was the largest chariot racetrack in the Roman Empire. It could hold over 200,000 people in the stands. If you've never seen either the old version, which is much better than the remake of Ben-Hur, some of you heard of it, right? There's a book it was based on, was a bestseller, and it was, you know, of course, the novel, historical novel fiction. The point is that there were chariot races at the end of, you know, the two film versions of it and the book, and they were set here in this amphitheater. So we know where this is. It's on the hill or below. His urban villa was at the bottom. You could say that we're near the bottom of the tallest hill in Rome, which is where the circus was, which is above the forum. In other words, his house was somewhere between the forum and the top of the tallest hill in Rome. And that hill, you don't have to know the name of it, but I'll spell it for you. Palatine Hill, Palatantine. But that's not a word you have to know. You can just say it was near the bottom of, or at the foot of the tallest hill in Rome, which led to this racetrack, this chariot race amphitheater called the Circus Maximus. And so we can place this guy's house almost down to the block where it would have been originally, because it's long gone. Now, last thing is the formal analysis. Now is why I say that this is an example of how some Roman artists, this one particularly, weren't as skilled as the others, like the last one we saw, in depicting depth. So let's do space, the element of space first. We have, of course, foreshortening. We have overlapping, obviously, and we do have diminishing size on the balconies of these houses. These are houses on this wealthy hillside where the wealthiest Romans lived. So we can say he used all those three techniques quite well, but there's no atmospheric perspective. That's the sky. And there isn't even an attempt to do something freehand of the other, like the last slide we saw that had a freehand approximation of scientific perspective. That's not even remotely present here. There's no effort to make things fade into the distance consistently the way human beings and human eyesight perceived objects in the distance. Of course, this artist didn't understand that concept. Most Roman fresco artists didn't. Only a few had that concept. But that doesn't mean it's not a well-done piece. So let's do the other elements. The formal, texture, there we go, is superb. I already hinted at that, but look at that marble. You can see the flecks, the veins in the marble. You can almost feel how the cold metal on the brass or bronze of the door will be bronze. And the glass, smooth glass in the windows, and of course the smooth marble and gold here on this column. And then these are wooden balcony, and most of the structures here, well, there's some tile work. So it's all realistic cemented textures on the structures, all the way back to the stone columns on the Circus Maximus. That's all well done, and the modeling on all those same objects, very sharp and realistic. Then we have the rhythm of the arches, the window panes here, the decorative details around the door. And then we have also, we're finishing up on the formal elements of this, the cityscape. Okay, we're almost done. Then we're going to do two of the most important slides you're going to see tonight. So you want to stick with, and that's the Coliseum and the Pantheon. Those two very high probabilities of the next two slides of being on one or both on the midterm. Okay, to wrap up the formal elements, this has good cemented texture and strong modeling too, of course, on the marble, the column. Color is mostly warm, right? The only thing really cool is the sky up above. Maybe the glass in that window, yeah, I guess you could say, and these plants. So he was so wealthy, he put fancy, exotic plants outside the entrance to his house on the streets of Rome. And I assume he had some kind of security. I don't know what he had, or people would steal, you'd think, those marble urns, but somehow apparently they were safe where they were. Because this villa would have been on the street but it would have been an upper class neighborhood, of course, where he was living. So you see all these indicators of his wealth. I often don't even mention these fancy plans on the front, in front of the main wall entrance to his villa. Okay, let's see. The largest mass, I'd say it's the column, and then the entry hall, and then it's a close call. You could say the circus, even though it's in the distance. But if you're just counting what's in the foreground, then it would be the left-hand side of the entry walls. thin line, everything's got thin line, and balanced. I would say roughly balanced, but people, technically you could make the case that this is sky, so that's empty, not mass or empty space. In which case you would make the case that if you drew the line down the middle, it would be unbalanced toward the bottom. But to me, this is kind of empty space here, so I think it's roughly balanced. And left to right, it is roughly balanced, I would say, almost the same on both sides. Okay, let's see, am I forgetting anything? Stable, mostly stable on the foreground, right? The entryway, all of the, the doorway, the column. And then it's somewhat dynamic in the middle ground. And technically speaking, this is stable because it's all tall, straight, upright columns on the Circus Maximus, but of course you see it at a diagonal. So that's where the foreshortening, of course, is really pronounced. So you could make the case that that is dynamic and it's roughly equally mixed, dynamic and stable. Okay, not a must know, just a quick reference. This is a fresco from Pompeii with that same color we were talking about before the break, Pompeii red it's called, which by the way, in London, if you ever go to London, there are hundreds of houses in Greater London that were, of course, around in the 1700s when Pompeii was rediscovered. And they used this color, and they hired some of them Italian painters coming from that part of Italy, which by the way, Pompeii is in southern Italy, near Naples. And so they had that skill, exactly the right combination of, it's not your normal red, it's mixed with other colors. I can't even describe that. If you've done some painting, some of you have taken painting classes, I know you may know how this could have been created with modern pigments, what have you. We're talking about oil paints probably by this time. But this is not an oil painting. This is a fresco on the wall of another Pompeii villa of Hercules, the strong man, the superhuman, right, hero of ancient Greece and Rome, returning to his mother's house for the first time in 20 years. And she's either shocked to see him or she's shocked at his nudity. We're not sure which. Anyway, this is a typical example, again, of the skill of Roman fresco painters and the details on the, the musculature, the anatomically correct, features on his physique, especially, and the clothing, everything. It's quite well done. Okay, really important slide. Definitely not going to be cut from the study list. Okay, and this is the Coliseum. I think everyone kind of already knows that, but I'll spell it for you, of course, because it's got two S's. Some people forget that. But here it is right in front of you guys. Will be on the test on your syllabus. Colossseum, Coliseum, Rome, 80 AD or CE. Well, let's start with, it was the largest, outdoor arena. Now, I used to say amphitheater, and people understandably could get confused. Wait a minute, didn't I just say that the Circus Maximus on that hill above that guy's house in the last villa? Yeah, that was the largest outdoor amphitheater where sporting events, of course, were held. Obviously, I already said chariot races. But this was the largest outdoor arena in all of the Roman Empire. It's not the only one, even though it's the most famous one, and most people can't think of any others. I've seen over 24 Colosseums in cities that the Romans had built during the 500 years of their rule over 3 continents. By the way, one quick aside, you don't have to write this. This is why we say, when say the Roman Empire dominated three continents. They ruled all of North Africa, everything on both sides of the Arabian Peninsula, down the coastline of what's all the populated areas at that time. The rest of it's the interior, which is totally desert then. There wasn't a Mecca or a Medina then. We're talking about thousands of years ago. All of the Middle East, all the way into what's now Iran, meaning Persia, and they briefly ruled part of Iran, all the way around the Black Sea, what's the southern third of Ukraine, where all that horrible fighting is going on now, all the way across Europe, including most of Germany. They didn't rule what's now Scandinavia, but they ruled 2/3 of the British Isles. They actually ruled half of Scotland, all of Wales and England. Pretty remarkable. 50 different cultures or provinces, each one of which had populations of 2, 3 million, 4 million. The estimate of the population of the entire empire at its peak, before it started declining, around 200 AD, was about 220 million people. Even now, that would be one of the world's biggest countries, of course. Pretty impressive. So this was the largest, I'll say again for the first fact about the meeting, it was the largest arena. And it was used, I think everybody knows, but if you don't, you should be writing this, for gladiator combats or gladiatorial combats, which is, of course, combat to the death between armed gladiators who were all slaves. They had no choice in the matter. If you didn't see the movie Gladiator, right, you were with Russell Crowe as the starring. It's an excellent movie, very accurate to the period of history that it covers. They recreated this pretty accurately, what it would have looked like to have been forced to go in here and fight for your life. So it was most famous for its gladiator. You can skip some more gladiatorial. Is it I can never remember, torial combat between, the slaves, armed slaves. But there was other things that went on here. Does anybody know what else this was used for besides gladiator contests? There were other violent entertainments held here, public entertainments. Anybody know anything else that could have happened in the Coliseum besides gladiator fights? Oh, somebody wants to be admitted. There we go. Hopefully. All right. Why is it doing that? Let's do this. There we go. Can you guys see this still? Yes. Uh-oh.
I cannot.
Yeah.
No, it's just you.
Oh, all right. So I can fix it. It's going to take a minute or so. What I have to do, I don't want to end the meeting because that's not what we're trying to do, is go back to, actually, hang on. I gotta, why did that? Yeah, it's been glitching a lot lately. I noticed that. I'm talking about Zoom itself has been doing that. I've been talking to other professors. Okay, so we are going to pull up my class slides, and I'm gonna have to reinsert this. It'll work. I did this once last week. Was it the evening or the afternoon Monday class? I think. Here we go. This is the selection. I have to So let's get to the Coliseum, and this image should replace the others. But of course, in order to do that, we have to get rid of these slides. Yeah, there we go. And then we have to maximize this. Here we go. It's going to work. Do screen share. And now, hopefully, you guys should be able to see.
I can see it now.
Good. Thank you. I really appreciate the patience. All my students end up having to exercise, but here we go. We shouldn't have any more interruptions. Knocking on wood, actual wood here right below my computer. Okay, so this is the largest outdoor arena, and I was about to say that one of the events that occurred here was, it's not a myth. Christians versus lions, people used to say. What does that mean? The Christians fought the lions? No, they were tied to posts and they were food for the lions, or they were burned at a stake. You would say burn at the stake. Well, it doesn't matter what stake. They were tied to a wooden stake and then set fire, because Christians were outlawed. You know this, for 300 years, the Roman Empire, except for one emperor, we'll talk about him in the middle of that period of 300 years, who was more humanitarian. He stopped the persecution of the Christians temporarily, but then it went right back to it after. So for most of the first 3 centuries of the Common Era, Christians and some other religious groups, not just Christians, and gypsies, for instance, and other minorities, were tortured, imprisoned, outlawed, and sometimes executed. And when they were executed, it often was done with public entertainment, as public entertainment. So lions were often, starved nearly, to death. So they were so hungry they would eat any, of course, kinds of food that was put in front of them. And then, dozens of Christian martyrs, of course, they called themselves, were tied to stakes. And yes, there was, you can say lions versus Christians, because that's a short way of saying what that was. That was considered public entertainment. And other times, other Christians and other minorities, not only Christians, were sacrificed or killed with, being burned at the stake. But what was one more thing they did that most people don't know about, unless you've been to Rome or you've studied this. Okay, well, it's getting late, so I'll just say mock naval battles. That should surprise a few of you. Mock naval battles inside of an outdoor. Yep, they flooded the floor of the Coliseum. They had the best plumbing in the ancient world. They had indoor plumbing and indoor toilets. You know that, right? The Romans were the first culture in the world to have indoor plumbing. pretty advanced in that regard, among others, in terms of technology. Of course, their humanity aspects weren't so advanced, but they certainly, their infrastructure was the best the world had ever seen at that point. So they had a very well regulated, pipe system inside the Coliseum, so they could flood the floor, and then they would float, small but not miniature, but actual boats, not warships like as big as they would sail on the ocean, but or the Mediterranean, but good sized ships with maybe half a dozen or so gladiators on each ship, and they would attack. Each ship would attack other ships and try to board those ships and kill the people on board. So oh, great fun, right? The crowds loved this stuff. They ate it up. It was free, by the way. All these entertainments, these violent entertainments, they were always paid for by the emperor or the Senate, sometimes depending on who proposed it. Some people say placate the masses, because most people lived in dire poverty, of course, even in the capital, though there was a larger middle class in Rome itself than there was in many other parts of the empire. Still, the majority lived pretty poor lives, but they got this free entertainment, and it often included food, bread and circuses, they called it, where they provided food for people in the stands, food and wine, probably, as well as this kind of violent entertainment. Yeah, so mock naval battles weren't done very often, but it was done more than a few times. All right, so then we have the other question, which is, why is part of it missing? It's all part of the meaning course. About a third of the outer walls is missing. Oh, it must have fallen down, right? Oh no, not at all. This would be intact, as 2/3 of it still is today. If it weren't for one of the popes in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance, one of the popes during the Renaissance literally stole, I don't know any other word, took away the stone from the outer wall of 1/3 of the Coliseum in order to build the largest church on earth. It still is the largest. St. Peter's, the head of the Catholic Church. It's where it is, of course, is in the Vatican. You can just say Rome. The largest church in the world, St. Peter's, was built with barely a third of the stone from the outer walls of this guy. Well, that tells you how massive this structure was, because we still have the majority of it there. Believe me, anyone who's been here, has anybody, I think I've asked this more than once, if anyone in class tonight has been to Italy, or specifically to Rome. Well, if you ever go and you take the tour of this, you won't forget it. It's a pretty mind-boggling experience. And then we have the fact that it was it was the tallest structure in Rome. There we go. That's important detail. 160 feet tall, the height of a 16-story skyscraper. This single structure, and each section was 40 feet tall. So we're going to do the formal elements now in just a moment. But there's one more fact about the meaning that I sometimes skip over, but not tonight. It's pretty important. Does anybody know? I bet probably not, but maybe one or two of you have heard what happened inside this Coliseum when it rained in the middle of one of their, festivals. These were always done on religious holidays, by the way. All of these combats they had so many religious, every month there was a different religious holiday, of course. And well, it's not, of course, in Rome there was, by the time the empire was, conducting these games. So they always had, occasions to have these events, these violent entertainments. Does anybody know what happened when it rained during one of those games?
Didn't it flood? I could be wrong.
Well, that would be a logical guess, and it would have, or could have, but no, it didn't. So somehow this structure, or this site, I should say, never had to close during weather, for weather purposes. During rain, or the other extreme is it can get to 115 degrees in the summer. And this is before global warming, of course, in Italy in general, but especially in Rome. So those games were never called on the account of any weather phenomena or any conditions of the weather, either a heavy rainstorm or extreme heat waves. So how could they do that? Does anybody know how they managed to keep going during, the crowds wouldn't sit still for that. They didn't have to. Nobody's heard this? Okay. They had the first retractable dome. Again, they were ahead of us. Now, that ought to make some of you be skeptical. I don't mean literally a retractable dome. What I mean is they had a giant tarp that was attached to the outer edge, or the top, you can say the ridge or rim of the Coliseum up here, with ropes. And it was made out of canvas. And they had 800, you don't have to say that number, but that's how many it was, soldiers permanently stationed at the Coliseum. Of course, I don't mean they all had to stay 24 hours a day. Of course, they had shift changes. But at any point during games, certainly during live events, there were hundreds, you could just say hundreds of Roman soldiers assigned when it rained or started to rain. It looked like it was about to, or it got so hot that the audience was starting to, fry or, was getting uncomfortable. They would only pause for 20 minutes. Can you believe this? That's all it took them to pull that tarp all the way across the entire gigantic amphitheater, pull it and secure it tightly. And it had a 30-foot hole in the middle of the canvas that was, sewn into it, so that you got the sun. In other words, if you were one of those poor Christians or gypsies or whatever that was about to be eaten by a lion or burned, you could pray for God to send rain, but it wouldn't save you much. All it would do is delay your death by 20 minutes. Or if you were a gladiator, who was hoping that they wouldn't have to die that day, you couldn't hope for the weather to help you. It wouldn't stop the games. It took barely 20 minutes to pull that tarp all the way across and then resume the game, because they had this nice big opening in the middle where, of course, the sun comes down or the rain on the people fighting, and they don't matter, right? So they can get wet or baked and the crowd can still see them. So they never called any of their live events on account of the weather. They didn't have to. Today we have domes, retractable domes. I saw the one in Toronto was the first one. I think that goes back to the 70s or something, maybe early 80s. And it took 45 minutes for that dome to be completely, encasing over the top of the Coliseum. They call it the Coliseum too in Toronto, Canada. Twice as long as the Romans were able to do it. And last but not least, I almost forgot. This is a really important fact. Anybody know what the seating capacity, or let's say full capacity, we just say capacity, right? Maximum capacity, there we go, of the Coliseum was number of people it could hold. Anybody have an idea? It's in Stockstead, but she's got it a little bit low, according to my Roman and Italian history friends. Anybody know roughly what it could hold, or take a guess? Up to 70,000 people. Now, anybody here been to the Oakland Coliseum? Nobody? One or two people using each class, at least one ever, or you've seen events there, music events? Okay, maybe even some sports teams like the A's. Okay, the Oakland Coliseum is the largest Coliseum in the Bay Area. It can hold 50,000 standing room only. I've been there when it had that many during a World Series game in the 90s. So this could hold up to 20,000 more people than the largest Coliseum in the Bay Area. And I don't think there's any bigger than that anywhere else in the US. I don't think so. 50,000 is about the maximum a modern Coliseum or arena can hold. They could get up to 20,000 more people. That's standing room, of course, and that's the cheap, they're not even seats. You would be standing up here at the top, looking down. Of course, you wouldn't see very much, but some people, wanted to see whatever they could and just be there during the roar of the crowd and get some sense of being a part of it. So people would crowd all the way up to the top of this upper level, and where it was standing room only. And the total last fact about the meeting, the maximum capacity of this was up to 70,000. Most historians are conservative and put it at 50,000, but that's seating only. Okay, that's plenty of facts. I said this before, right? Obviously, so you aren't going to have to remember all those facts, or even maybe more than half of them, about 6 sentences, 6 separate facts out of all the ones I just gave you. If this is on the midterm, and it has a very high, I will even say, probability of being on the midterm, either in the slide application part, we'll talk about what that means next week, or the short essay part. Okay, formal analysis. I already gave you the space, but I'll repeat it. The 2 facts you need to know about space. It's all real, of course. It's 160 feet tall, and it could hold up to 70,000 people inside. Now, is it stable or dynamic? Well, it's both, because it's not round. I know people think it's round. It's oval shaped, but each archway is round. So those are the dynamic elements. And of course, the columns and piers, remember that word I said would probably come up on the midterm, these here, are themselves stable. So it's both really. And then we have the texture is the real rough texture of stone. It used to be clad in white marble. That was also taken off. Some parts of the white marble survive, but most of what you see is a cool off-white or gray color now. The inner walls, though, were brick and they were red, so that's warm, but you can't see that in this slide. So just say what you see on the exterior was the real rough texture of stone, and the color was a cool off-white. Okay, the rhythm, obviously the repeated shapes of the arches and the columns between them create powerful rhythm. And the largest mass, there is no largest mass. Each of the four sections are the same height. Is it balanced? Yes. When it was intact, it was completely symmetrical, left to right and top to bottom. Now, if you had a full view of it, from, above or a long distance away, you'd see part of the wall missing. Then you could say in that view, it's unbalanced towards whatever side, it would probably be to the left. But the way this slide looks, you just keep it simple. Say originally, it was a completely symmetrical structure, and therefore it was balanced left to right and top to bottom, because you got 80 feet here and 80 feet above, right? And then we have modeling is, of course, just the shadows from the sun. The lines are all visual lines, but there are some carved lines, but you can't see them here. So you could just say, in this photo, you only see the visual lines that are created by the natural modeling or shadows from the sun around the arches. Okay, let's see. Are we forgetting anything? Stable. Oh, mass. I already said no. I think I covered it all. Space, rhythm, stable, dynamic, texture, color. Yeah. Okay. Now this is one of the two most important slides for tonight. Okay, and this is the Pantheon, Pantheon, from Rome, the location, and the date is 125 AD. Okay, so what we see here, right, is why is it so important? It's just another Roman temple? Oh no, this is the largest dome building ever built in the Roman Empire. You can't say the ancient world. We'll see that after the midterm. That's in Istanbul, Turkey. It was built by the other half of the Roman Empire, but we'll get to that later. So I'll say it again very specifically. It's easy to write this correctly. This was the largest dome building in the Roman Empire. And it was also the only temple in the city of Rome dedicated to all the gods. Again, that's the only temple in Rome, the city itself, that was dedicated to all the gods. In other words, you could go here and worship all of the gods together or different gods at different times. In other words, it's up to you. This temple was dedicated to them all. That's what the name of it is, Pantheon. That means, translated from Latin, temple of all the gods. It's literally what the title of it tells us is the purpose. Remember, with the architecture, the first fact you should have either in a paper, if you write a paper on a building or architecture site, or in any slide, and you will have several architecture slides on the midterm and the final, is what's the purpose of it? Well, it was the temple of all the gods. But the most amazing thing about it is how big the dome is. The dome is made out of concrete. Remember, the Romans invented concrete and domes. They both appear on this building, two Roman inventions, and they're the largest of those features. A concrete dome, let's go to the next view of it, that was over 140 feet tall. In fact, I think most sources say 144 feet. So you could say over 140 feet, or you could be more specific if you want to, and say it was about 144 feet tall by over 140 feet wide. In other words, you could, let's go back to the main view. If it's on the exam, this will be the view you have. You could fit a 14-story skyscraper inside here, underneath the peak of the dome, and it still wouldn't touch the ceiling, be a few feet below. Skyscrapers are usually 10 feet per story, right? It's pretty impressive that they even could build it, but because of their technology with concrete and their engineering skill, this was a building that hasn't needed any repairs. It's the original building with the original portico. Remember that word I said last week for Greek temples could come up. In this case, it's of course with a Roman temple, a columned porch across the front of a Greek or Roman temple. Well, that's a portico, and there's your pediment. So that you could add that if it's an obvious, if you didn't happen to already remember that from last week's lecture, as part of the meaning of the notes. But it applies to any Greek or Roman temple. So it's got a portico with a pediment above that, but it's the dome that is the remarkable thing. And when you look at it from above, doesn't that look modern? Like it was built a few years ago, maybe a couple decades ago. It's a nearly 2000. I said 1500. I was thinking of the one in Istanbul. This dome is over 1800, close to 19 centuries old, and it hasn't a crack in it. It hasn't needed repairs. They poured concrete even better in Rome than we do today. How many modern concrete structures do you think will last 2000 years in this country? I doubt any of them will. Look at the Bay Bridge, the part that was built to replace, right? The part that collapsed from the East Bay to San Francisco. If you haven't driven across it, maybe you've heard this. In the first serious earthquake above, certainly if an 8.0 hits, I wouldn't want to be on that bridge. It's very likely to collapse. And it's supposed to be the same technology that the Romans invented, but it wasn't as well built as this. So here's your portico. Look how it's dwarfed. The portico is what we see in the first slide. So let's go back to that. And now we'll say one more thing about the meaning. In the middle, well, actually, I forgot. I meant to go forward. This is a painting, of course, but it's a very accurate one. That's the hole that was placed there for all the worshipers inside to pray if they felt like to any or all the Roman gods while they were inside. And that also meant the gods could see you while you were praying to them. So it was meant to be for both purposes, this hole. It's 30 feet wide, but it also has a practical function like everything else the Romans did. It keeps the building from flooding. Wait a minute, that can't be right. It should make it flood more easily. Nope. Just the opposite, because the Romans thought this through. They figured this out. They let this opening allow light, sunlight. That's nothing. It helps lighten up the interior. You see the effect there, the spotlight effect, and allows people to look up and see the gods if they felt like they could see them or just, feel their presence and praying to them. But it also allowed the water, when it hit the floor, to be drained out towards the walls and into sewer lines that carried it to the Tiber River. They figured that out, how to make the floor tilt just the right amount from the center towards the outer walls so that it always drained. It never, ever flooded 2000 years, this room. And it rains a heck of a lot.
Does plumbing still work?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Does the old Roman plumbing still work?
Yes. I was there when it rained cats and dogs, not literally, or else they would have been an unpleasant sight. It rained as heavy as I've ever seen it in Italy. Oh, you may know, and Italy's it's not a drought-ridden country, right? It's a very lush countryside, of course, outside Rome, where the wines come from, Tuscany and that area. So it rained one day when I was in Rome. I've been to Rome 4 times. So one day, I've been here about 3 times with some Italian friends. They said, "Oh, just don't stand underneath." And I said, "We're going to get our shoes are going to." No, the water just coursed in a thin little sheen on top of you have to write this, of course, of the floors, which are marble, perfectly evenly down towards the corners. And in the corners were these openings, which of course were the conduits into the sewer system. And the sewer system was made still the same sewer system the Romans built. They probably had to repair some of the sewers, I'm guessing, but it still functions the way the Romans designed it, and then carries the water all the way out to the Tiber River. Yeah. Internet connection unstable. Why is it doing that? I guess we're having one of those nights. Okay, can people still see this? Let's do the formal elements here. Okay. So I will add one other thing, that the building originally had marble. Last fact about the meaning. Marble casing along the walls. In fact, you could see where it would have been here. See there, that's all brick. Brick and stone, of course. But what happened was that those outer walls, the marble casing on them, was stolen by, yet another pope. But this was hundreds of years before the one at the Coliseum was stolen, the marble from that building. They built as many as 10 churches from the wall of the marble, lining the outer wall of this temple. That's how much marble it originally had. So what's left is the brickwork and the concrete, of course. But the portico is solid marble. That's marble. Those columns are imported from Egypt, so it's Egyptian marble. This is in every movie it's ever been set in Rome. There has to be a scene where a couple or people traveling or spies or, whatever, Angelina Jolie or something getting her assignment to go kill somebody. They meet each other in front of this because it's one of the most famous structures on Earth. Absolutely, for good reason. Formal analysis, balanced, completely symmetrical, and I would argue top to bottom. It just depends on how you look at it. If you do the line here, roughly halfway up these three, you see them three levels. I would say that there's enough mass above it and below it to be roughly balanced. But some people say because the dome does narrow up toward the top, that it's unbalanced toward the bottom. But it's totally symmetrical, of course, left to right. The largest mass, well, that isn't obvious until you stand above it. It's the outer walls, and then the dome, and then the portico, again, in that order. The dome is almost as large as the outer walls, but not quite so because they're so thick. So the outer walls are the largest mass, then the dome, then the portico. Textures are all the real texture of stone, real smooth marble on the portico, real rough brick on the walls, and real smooth concrete. Well, that's not technically stone, of course, it's man-made or human-made. So the concrete is smooth. They're all real textures. There's no simulated textures. Now here there is carved line. By the way, this mentions the name of the architect, Marcus Agrippa. You don't have to know there was an earlier temple called the Pantheon on this site, which was much smaller. But Rome grew so much in the next 100+ years that they needed a bigger one. So this is a second version of the Pantheon, the much bigger version. But the architect, it's same style, same architectural features of the original building. That's his name. You don't have to know what it was. It was Marcus Agrippa, but that's what the lettering means. So there are carved lines only there, right along or underneath the pediment there, or you can just say on the portico. Everything else, the lines are visual at the edges, of course, created by the modeling. And that's deep modeling with the shadows in this. Look how massive this portico is. And that's, of course, the natural sunlight. Shadows are being created by the sunlight. The modeling is not human-made. And then it's dynamic on the dome and the pediment and the outer walls, stable on the columns. So I'd say it's more dynamic than stable. I already mentioned the dimensions. But you should have that for space. Of course, it's a real round domed room with about 144-foot tall dome, or you say a dome that reaches a height of about 144 feet and a width of over 140. I think it's 142 by 144. You don't have to get that exact. You can just say over 140 if you want to keep it simple, both in height and width. A massive, immense. Oh, by the way, it still functions as a church. You don't have to add that now. You have enough facts on the meaning, but it still functions, owned by the Catholic Church, and they still use it as a Christian church to this day. It was not originally built. Christians wouldn't have been allowed in here when it was new. Okay, then what else? The rhythm, of course, of the columns and the, you could say the lettering creates rhythm. The dome itself has rhythm, doesn't it? With those ridges and the decorative trim around the portico, the pediment. The color is cool on the dome and the portico, warm on the outer walls. Okay. Let's see, balance, mass. I think we covered it. Rhythm. Okay, let's do two more and we'll end. Well, wait a minute. We're at 9:16. Let's do just one more. Okay, I'm going to go over this because we're going to come back to it. We'll just do this one. Okay, so that'll leave us, let me do the math, not as many as we would have had otherwise. Well, almost. It will leave us with 1, 2, 3, three must-knows, but they'll be my own slides, which are actually better. Well, we'll see. These are the professional slides that are in the slide library for files, right? Okay, this won't take more than a few minutes. We'll keep it brief. This is a must-know, equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. That's EQUESTRIAN, equestrian statue of Marcus, Marcus, Aurelius, Aurelius. He was the last Roman emperor of Pax Romana, the last one to rule during that period of peace and stability. Rome, the location, and the date is 175 AD or CE. So he was a very popular emperor, and even more remarkable, some would say, is that he wasn't originally trained as a Roman emperor or raised to be. I mean, almost all the others were descended from a parent who was an emperor. He was, I think he was appointed. In any case, he became emperor after being first, get this, a writer, a professor, and a philosopher. He spoke multiple languages. Here's all the facts about the meeting about who he was. He was a really well-educated man, and he was a humanist. He didn't believe in persecuting people from different religions, so he stopped the persecutions, at least paused it temporarily. But for many years, he was emperor for 20 years. So sometime during his early period of his reign, he stopped the persecution of the Christians, which resumed as soon as he died. And he was, again, originally trained to be a scholar. He wrote several books that were, yes, published, publishing men hand printed, but they were, they were bestsellers in their own way. Those books were read by, thousands of people, I'm sure, in Rome. And he was also a teacher, an actual instructor of philosophy. So he was a philosopher, a professor or instructor, and an author, and well-educated. And then when he became emperor, he was more of a humanist than most. So when his statue was lost after the fall of Rome, people thought it was gone, destroyed, melted down. It was found again during the Renaissance, about 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. By the way, this is the City Hall of Rome. That's where it is, in a plaza in front of the City Hall, which is by Michelangelo, the building behind me. You don't have to add that fact, but it's a very, very famous plaza. People misunderstood who it was. The Roman Catholic Church thought it was Constantine. That's part of the meaning. The first Christian emperor. 150 years later, Constantine made Rome the Christian empire that it became. And not only legalized Christianity, he converted to Christianity. We'll get to him after the midterm. So just keep it simple and say, this man was, this sculpture, was misidentified when it was first rediscovered during the Renaissance after being lost for 1,000 years. And when it was re-erected here in the plaza, it was labeled down below as though it was a different emperor, the wrong one, the first Christian emperor, which is why the Catholic Church wanted it displayed here. But then they figured out, oh, no, it isn't. It's Marcus Aurelius. By the way, this is the guy that's in the movie Gladiator, where Joaquin Phoenix's character, his son, that was a real person, but he didn't get suffocated by his own son. He died of natural causes in old age. Marcus Aurelius, the actual emperor. If you're curious, that actor was Richard Harris, who later played Dumbledore in the first 3 Harry Potter movies, I think. Great actor. Yeah, he played Marcus Aurelius in the movie Gladiator, and Joaquin Phoenix played his son, who was as corrupt as the character in that movie, but he didn't kill his own father. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning. Let's do the formal analysis and call it a night. It's balanced completely, of course. It's a man on a horse with both his legs, both his arms. The horse has all 4 of its legs, and he's straddling the middle of the horse. I would argue it's balanced top to bottom and left to right. It's definitely balanced left to right. If you draw the line across the middle of the horse's body. The mass is pretty easy. The largest, there are only 3, is the horse, and then the emperor. By the way, it's twice life size. Well, I didn't get to space yet. So he's the second largest mass, and then the base. This is added later by the Catholic Church with the wrong information. Oh, and the statue's not there anymore. It's a copy, a full-size copy, because it was deteriorating in the pollution. Rome is a very polluted city. It's a huge, very crowded city. So they put the original statue, the Roman original one, in a museum right next door. You'd have to go inside the museum to see the original. This is a copy that was put there about 50 years ago, I think. But it's the same exact design, of course. And so we have the similar texture, superb, isn't it? On the robes, on his face, his hair, and of course the horse's body, all done with Carveline. And it is a warm, originally was, a warm bronze color, but now it's turned cool green because of the discoloring, the oxidation it's called, but you can just say from the weather, rain and moisture has caused it to discolor into a green or cool color. It is almost entirely stable. He's sitting upright, his arms out at a right angle, his body is completely upright. The horse is looking at us if you stand in front of it, and the horse's, even the front leg is both of his legs are stable. The only dynamic parts are the details of the top of his head and the horse's head. I guess maybe the hind legs. Okay. And the rhythm is obvious, repeated shapes of the arms, hands, legs, feet of the animals. Okay, and the only modeling is the shadows from the sun. All right, we've had a very successful. The good news is it gets us a little ahead of where we would normally be, so that we'll have a little more time for discussing the midterm next week. But we still have 3 more must-know slides at the start of our class on Monday. So here we go. All right. Anybody have any questions about anything we've covered? About, your papers are due by midnight. I haven't seen too many of them, so I hope you're gonna. If you send them after midnight, they'll still be accepted and graded, probably along with the rest. But if they're within the first day, but anything after midnight, I have to have some deadline. The cutoff would be 5 points off for being late. So why handicap or start off with a negative of 5 points before the grading of your papers is even starting. So to avoid that penalty, try to get them in before midnight. Okay, and I already said how to do it, so I have to repeat that. But anybody have any questions? I think 1 or 2 people joined a little later. Yes, Caitlin.
I have a question. Yeah, I just want to make sure that I was just going to put like a little bit of opinion about why I chose the piece, like what I thought of it as a viewer, and I just want to make sure I wouldn't get dropped points for that, or if I should just leave that out.
That's a very good question, and it sometimes confuses my new readers. I try to remember to tell them, but I don't have any new readers now. They're experienced. They're ones who took the same class and wrote the same papers you guys are doing, and have been doing it for anywhere from 18 months. I think I have 1 for each class, right? 3 readers to 3 years, my most experienced one. And if it's me grading your paper, obviously I'm going to remember. That's fine, as long as you have at least a full page in addition to your opinion from research. So then you've covered it. Yeah, because you can say what you want. In fact, I encourage you to do that. It's
okay, great.
Whatever work of art is, I assume you chose it because you have some opinion about it or some reaction to why you liked it enough to want to research it. Yeah, that's the bottom line. Keep it to keep it, at least have a full page, minimum 23 type lines, double spaced or more, of research-based material on the meaning, and then you can add how much ever you want about your opinion. Okay. Any other questions about anything relating to tonight's lecture? You definitely won't want to miss next week, or sign out early. Not too many people have been doing that, I noticed, and I commend that, this class and Joe. But that would be not a good move. I know we're going to have to take it maybe an earlier than usual break and then do the review portion, because that's when we're going to cut the list of both the terms to know and the syllabus, the must know slides, way down by at least a third. In fact, I put it on I'll repeat this when we start next week's review. I put it in writing. Let's see. Yeah, 40% of the must know slides, and probably not as much of the list of terms, because that's nowhere near as long. Probably 30% of that will cut. But that'll mean you'll know what not to waste time studying. Okay, so you do want to, of course, that lecture will be posted, but the exam is not going to be recorded. It is not going on YouTube. It's live. It's in real time. So you want to log in. You'll get a reminder, not until 3 weeks from tonight, but the night before the exam, probably. I will remind you, don't be late to that class, or at least not more than 5 minutes, because the first slide will hit the screen at 6:45 for the midterm, which is 3 weeks from tonight. However, at some point, if you've started the exam and you can then, not finish all the answers, or you do in real time, before we log off, for the exam portion of the class on the 28th, now is when the midterm is, you will have until midnight to go back and change, correct, add to your answers if you want from your notes. This is an open book, of course, an open note exam. So, but there is a cutoff. I have to have a cutoff, and it's either on time by midnight of the night of the exam, or I can't accept it. So please, unless you have, and if you do, of course, it's the college district's rule, and it's in my syllabus. I've already mentioned it, but I'll repeat that. At the point where the exam itself is starting, if something happens and you physically can't attend that night's lecture, I need some kind of written evidence, it's not my rule, of what happened that is either a family emergency or medical. Any kind of written evidence to verify you had an unavoidable emergency. You can then, you'll still have to do the same amount of work, maybe more, on an alternative assignment as a makeup. because you can't go, with 100 points missing from your total of 400 and get a good grade. So really just try to make sure you attend the full lecture of the review session next Wednesday. And then 2 weeks later, try to log on by 6:40 at the latest. And remember that the exam is not being recorded. It's done in real time. Okay, any other questions? Anybody have? I know we ran a little late. Yes, sorry. Someone? I thought I heard someone about to ask. Of course, you can email me in the next week or so, and then I'll respond within 24 hours.
I apologize. I might have misheard, but this following Monday, I'm gonna flight to Georgia for a funeral during class. Is that the class we can't miss, or is it the one after
Oh,
that?
no, well, I'm glad you asked. You don't have to even show me because that's not the day the test is. You'll see that on YouTube. You
I
will.
just wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure which Monday. So like this
I will
following Monday,
post.
I'm not here.
Sure. No, it's important. So you shouldn't worry too much about that. It's easier for people if they're here a little bit because they can ask questions. That's why I don't mute my students, why we have these interactions like we're having now. But if you can't obviously that night, you'll still be able to figure out, but make sure you watch that maybe more than once before you start studying the actual notes, because you'll find out by looking at the YouTube video, which is posted by 8 p.m. on Friday that week. Well, of course, then you've got the whole spring break if you choose to study during the spring break. So you'll be able to see, okay, that's not on here. I'm going to cross off this and this and this, and then you'll know what's left over you need to study. Okay,
Thank you.
that helps. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Is Catherine Andrews a dog lover, I guess?
Yeah, that's my pup.
What breed? Because we have a mixed Spaniel that we adopted from a rescue, of course. What is that? I can't tell what that is.
Probably because I haven't heard of it very much. It is a Doodle,
I've heard of
Great
those.
Pyrenees and Standard Poodle.
Yeah.
First generation.
Very cute. Yeah. Okay. Well, you might have guessed I'm an animal lover. We have both a cat and a dog, and they only occasionally are friendly. They usually have a rivalry that we have to keep them up separated because of it.
Oh gosh.
The cat was here first, and the cat is 12 years old and very huge, 12 pounds.
He's stuck in his ways.
Yeah, exactly. But we managed to, feed them separately so they don't fight over each other's food, unless we don't watch closely enough. Okay, that's plenty. Here we are at 9:30. Literally, we went later than I've ever gone before. But you guys are great to, comments, input, questions, what have you. I'm still here if you have any questions remaining that I didn't answer that are on the tip of your tongue. One more chance.
I'm not gonna talk about it all here. I did send you an email, and I don't know if you got it.
Well, what's the general topic without getting specific? Is it about, because your papers are due tonight, right? So if it's something to do about the requirements of your paper, you should go ahead and ask. I'm not going to check my email now. I've been working for about 10 hours with a brief break. I had a whole class this afternoon that takes time to set up for, plus I had to get all my notes ready because I've made some changes in the syllabus for these two classes. I teach two classes almost back to back on Monday. So what I'm saying is if you needed a response tonight, you should ask me now. But if it's something not appropriately to share with other people, I understand. I will get back to you tomorrow is what I'm saying. If it's, you just want me to respond by email. Is that right? Is that okay?
Yes, but it does have to do with the essay, unfortunately.
Well, then you should be able to ask the question, I think. I mean, it's your advantage now. I got to tell you, you see, it's going to be logged in a file system that's not on this laptop. This laptop only has enough capacity for all my Zoom lectures and my YouTube. I don't store the papers on this laptop. I know that sounds odd, but I have a mainframe, I call it, whatever. My main computer is in a studio in a building that is not in my house. And there was no heat. And it is now, well past 9:30. So I don't think I'll be able to check that. I mean, I could. Well, if it's just you know what? Wait a minute. If it's just an email question, I can answer it. I apologize. I have email, of course, on my laptop.
Yeah.
But because, in other words, if you're sending me a sample of your paper, it's too late anyway. I never.
No, it's not that at all.
Then you're all right. I will respond It could be a while. I need to take a break here. So it might be 11 p.m. tonight. No, it won't be that late. It won't
I'm just
be
gonna toss it out there. Secondary question on that. I'm almost done with mine, but I'm also a weirdo who likes to stress about it. Is it a very firm deadline if it won't be accepted at all past
Oh,
midnight?
no. I
With
just said
a
earlier, I
reduction in
guess.
points like
No.
tomorrow?
No, it's only 5 points off if it's even if you need more time than a few hours. The sooner the better is only applies, in a sort of general way, but you
Because it
can
would be
take
in by
up
the
to
morning at
6
the
days.
latest. I just want to know if
5
it was
points.
like
Oh, I'll
hard cut
accept it.
midnight.
Well, let me just clarify for everyone. I don't reject late papers. Some professors do, or start adding more point deductions for every week they're late or every. I take 5 points off if it's less than a week late. So if you need until tomorrow or Thursday, Friday, as long as you get in before next Wednesday, it'll be only 5 points off. And you can make that up with extra credit. If it helps you do a better job, that's not a bad strategy. You see what I'm saying? Since I take it, but after 1 week, it's 10 points
Mhm.
off and then it doesn't go up. So you see, you have some flexibility. I wouldn't wait past that though.
I
because you-
appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so take
Okay,
your
you-
time. Yeah, take
Actually,
your
you
time.
don't have to answer my email anymore. Basically, it was
No,
I figured
okay.
just
I'd
on,
throw it
it
out
was
there. 'Cause
about
almost
extra.
everyone asks.
Sure,
It was
main
about
papers,
extra time.
absolutely. I totally understand the need for that. If you didn't guess,
I do
I was
have my
sure.
IEP too, so I was basically just asking for extra time.
Well, you will have it, but I have to enforce the same standards. However, 5 points
Yes.
off is not even a whole grade, and
No.
easily you can make that up with sending me one article from a website, of course, that was published. A page or more about any topic related to art. Remember, that's a 5 point option. You can do that 4 times. For extra credit,
Okay.
which will right there make up unless you wait another whole week and then it's 10.
No. Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
That helps. So
Answered my question.
de-stress. Okay, then I won't worry about responding to that email tonight. Anybody else though have something that's more of an urgent question that needs an answer tonight?
No, I think that's it. Perfect.
Well, you
Oh,
guys are
sorry.
very proactive. I appreciate that. And I hope that helped everyone. And I hope you found some of these slides interesting. I'm going to show you some slides you don't think you'd ever see in any other class of up close and detailed stuff inside some of these Roman ruins, and also the Roman Forum itself, which we haven't looked at, where all the main buildings once were. But that'll only be about 20 minutes before the break. And then after the break, we do the review, discuss how the test is going to be given and what's on it and what's not. That'll be the main task for the second half next week. All right, see you guys all next Monday. All right, take care.
See you then. Bye.
Good night. Have a good week. Bye.